Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Deep in the barren heartland of rural America, where fog rolled off the fields like a ghostly tide and the silence was as thick as the midnight gloom, the townsfolk whispered of an old house. A house whispered to have witnessed unspeakable horrors and that now served as a repository of true, terrifying events. Its crumbling Victorian structure stood apart from the modest homes of the nearby hamlet of Eldridge, a constant reminder of a past better left forgotten. Tonight, however, that shadowed relic would reveal the truth behind its name. True, scary stories to fall asleep. Martha Hale, a young journalist with an insatiable curiosity and a penchant for the macabre, drove past the outskirts of Eldridge as the fading daylight surrendered to an oppressive darkness. Having grown up with bedtime stories of ghosts and specters, she had recently encountered an old diary in the attic of her late grandmother's house. The diary was filled with accounts of eerie happenings at the abandoned mansion on Hillcrest Road, a place once used as a sanatorium and rumored to be cursed by the suffering souls of its former inmates. The diary had planted a seed in her mind, one that now demanded she venture into the belly of this haunted mystery. The night was unnervingly silent as Martha parked her car at the edge of a long, winding dirt road that led straight to the mansion. The building emerged from the mist like a phantom, its silhouette jagged and foreboding against the starless sky. With a deep, steadying breath, she stepped out and approached the creaking wrought iron gate, its chains clanging with each gust of wind. "This is it," she murmured to herself, though the words echoed back like a spectral taunt. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of decaying corridors and dust-choked rooms frozen in time. Faded portraits of smiling residents long since departed hung crookedly on the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Martha as she explored. Every step was accompanied by the crunch of broken glass and the distant sound of whispering voices, like the rustle of dead leaves. She clutched her flashlight tightly, its narrow beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, as if daring the house to reveal its secrets. As Martha advanced down a long corridor, she heard it, a soft, disembodied laugh, followed by an indistinct, urgent whisper. "You shouldn't have come," it seemed to say. The voice was not one of malevolence, but one of desperation and profound sadness, as if the speaker were pleading to be freed from a terrible torment. Her heart pounded in her ears while her rational mind urged her to run. Yet the promise of uncovering a truly authentic horror story compelled her to press on. She entered a large parlor where time appeared to have collapsed. Furniture lay scattered in disrepair, and a grand, dust-covered piano stood in the corner. As she moved closer, the lid of the piano creaked open, revealing yellowed sheet music. The notes on the paper were scrawled in a spidery hand, and as if drawn by some supernatural force, her eyes were drawn to a single name scribbled in the margin. Evelyn. At that moment, the room grew colder, and the spectral whisper returned, slightly louder. "Evelyn, help me, save me." Martha's pulse raced as she explored further, the oppressive atmosphere reaching into the deepest recesses of her psyche. She found a narrow staircase leading to a long, forgotten attic, its creaking steps inviting her upward. Every step seemed to echo a memory, a terrible secret that had long haunted the building. At the top, amidst a clutter of aged furniture and broken heirlooms, she discovered an antique mirror with a tarnished silver frame, its surface clouded by decades of grime, yet still reflecting an image. In the mirror's dim reflection, behind her, a woman in a decayed white gown stood silently. The woman's eyes were hollow and pleading, her face contorted by sorrow and regret. Martha spun around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but found only empty darkness. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. In a voice that was both mournful and insistent, the apparition replied, "Evelyn, trapped, cursed." The room seemed to pulse with the weight of the unseen presence, each second stretching out in suspense. The ghostly figure slowly faded from the mirror, leaving only a lingering feeling of despair and the echo of a desperate cry. Determined to unravel the mystery, Martha scanned the attic for any further clues. Hidden beneath a torn velvet curtain in a forgotten corner was a battered trunk, its lock rusted but yielding to the force of her curiosity. Inside the trunk lay a collection of personal mementos, a locket containing a faded photograph, letters bound in a brittle ribbon, and a diary that matched the style of the one she had received from her grandmother. The diary's pages detailed the grim history of the mansion, recounting the tragic story of Evelyn Blackwood, a gentle soul who had been admitted to the sanatorium for reasons that were whispered but never fully explained. She had been accused of crimes she did not commit, her only sin being the knowledge of forbidden family secrets passed down through generations. Abandoned and tormented, Evelyn's spirit had been doomed to wander the halls of the mansion, her cry for justice echoing through time. In the next few hours, as the storm outside intensified and the wind howled like lost souls, Martha became both investigator and witness to the mansion's spectral inhabitants. Strange occurrences escalated, doors slammed shut by unseen hands, cold drafts whispered in her ear, and haunting lullabies resonated from dark corners. At every turn, the ghost of Evelyn seemed to guide her, as if desperate to have her story told. "You must help me, Martha," the spectral voice insisted in moments of sudden, inescapable clarity. "Tell the truth of our suffering. Tell the world." One particularly harrowing moment found Martha in a decaying dining room, its table set as if awaiting a long-departed feast. The silverware glistened ominously in the wavering light, and the muted tones of a forgotten symphony played faintly from an old gramophone in the corner. Here, the ghost of a former caretaker, Mr. Whitaker, emerged from the shadows. His gaunt face was lined with sorrow, and his eyes, deep and melancholic, betrayed a lifetime of regret. "We are cursed to relive our demise, night after endless night," he intoned in a voice that vibrated with an ancient sorrow. "This mansion is a prison for the innocent and the damned alike. You, too, are now part of its history." Martha's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of truth. She questioned the spectral inhabitants, each revealing a shard of the mansion's gruesome past. Patients who were subjected to horrific treatments, erroneous punishments for imagined crimes, and the culminating terror of a night when the mansion's very foundation drank in the blood of countless innocents. The stories were interwoven with true horror, a testament to human cruelty and despair that transcended time. During one such encounter, while flipping through the diary in a flickering beam of lightning, Martha came upon a chilling entry. It described a night much like this one, where the mansion had come alive with whispers and wails. The writer, apparently a tormented soul trapped within the walls, recorded a final plea. "If you value your life, leave now, for the truth behind these walls is a contagion that infects your very soul." The entry ended abruptly, as if the writer had been cut off by an abrupt, unseen force. For a moment, Martha hesitated, grappling with the gravity of her discoveries. She could feel the darkness seeping into her own heart, the slow transformation from a curious investigator to a reluctant part of the mansion's tragic narrative. Yet, the pull of the unknown was irresistible. With renewed determination, Martha sought the mansion's library, a room where time itself seemed frozen in dust. Ancient tomes lined the shelves, each containing accounts of strange rituals and forgotten lore. In the center of the library stood a grand desk, upon which lay a single ominous volume bound in cracked leather. Its pages were filled with cryptic symbols and frantic script, delineating a ritual meant to break the curse of the mansion. It foretold that the truth behind the cursed souls was buried not only in their stories, but in a singular act of redemption, a confirmation of innocence that would set their tormented spirits free. As the storm reached its climax, Martha gathered all her evidence, piecing together the tragic tale of betrayal, injustice, and unyielding despair. The spirit of Evelyn returned one final time, her eyes now burning with a sorrowful hope. "Martha, you must speak for us," she implored, her ghostly hand reaching out as if grasping for salvation. "Tell our truth, expose the horrors we endured, so that others may learn from our fate and never commit the same atrocities again." In that moment, Martha understood the paradox of her quest. She was now forever bound to a story of true horror, a narrative that straddled the divide between the living and the dead, a grim legacy of a forgotten past that demanded to be heard. Resolute, Martha began to type, her fingers trembling but determined. Every keystroke was a small act of defiance against the lingering darkness of the mansion. The words flowed from her as if dictated by the restless spirits themselves, a testament to the brutal truths that had been hidden for so long. Outside, the storm abated, the oppressive clouds parting to reveal a bleak dawn. The mansion, too, seemed to exhale a long-awaited sigh as if, for a moment, its tormented history had been acknowledged. Yet, even as the light crept over the horizon, an eerie chill permeated the air, a lingering reminder that the ghosts of the past were never truly at rest. In the days and months that followed, Martha's story of the haunted mansion and its cursed souls reverberated far beyond the small town of Eldridge. Readers across the nation were captivated and horrified by her meticulous account, finding in its pages both a confession of historical wrongdoing and a chilling warning. But for Martha, the true horror was not in the monstrosity of human acts that had led to this suffering, but in the realization that some truths refuse to die, that some stories are as inexorable as the march of time. Late at night, as she sat before her computer with the story finished, Martha felt a quiet, unsettling presence in her apartment, a whisper from the other side, echoing faintly, "Thank you, Martha." The guilt mingled with relief. She had been the vessel for stories too terrible to be forgotten. And even though the ghosts had finally found their voice, she knew that, in sharing their truth, a piece of her own soul would forever remain tethered to that cursed mansion, to the painful legacy of Evelyn Blackwood, and to the countless lost souls still wandering in the hidden shadows of the past. In every creak of the floorboard at midnight, and every unexpected whisper amid the silence, Martha could sense their presence, a constant, inescapable reminder of the true price of uncovering horror. The story was now out in the world, a permanent marker on the boundary between the waking and the dreaming, a spectral admonition that some secrets, once unearthed, will haunt you for eternity. And in that final, lingering sense of dread, she understood that the most profound terror lay not in the unknown, but in the truth that could never be hidden. A truth whose echo would forever disturb the quiet moments before sleep, turning them into a restless vigil of remembrance and regret.
Story number 2.
In a forgotten corner of New England, where the withered forests whispered ancient secrets and the barren moors stretched like scar tissue across the land, there lay an isolated inn known as the Black Hallow. The building had once been a thriving refuge for weary travelers in the 19th century, but decades of neglect had draped it in a shroud of decay and suspicion. Locals avoided the place, speaking in hushed tones about its cursed past, a series of disappearances, inexplicable deaths, and whispers of a presence that fed on human fear. Harper Reed, a dedicated but embattled writer recovering from a troubled past, arrived at the inn on a rain-lashed autumn evening. Seeking solitude and inspiration for her next novel, she had rented a single room, unaware that she had chosen a residence where nightmares lived and breathed. The narrow, winding road leading to the Black Hallow was flanked by gnarled trees whose limbs clawed at the starless sky like desperate hands. With each mile traveled, Harper felt an inexplicable chill, as if unseen eyes were tracking her every move. The inn's facade was a decrepit monument to a bygone era, a forlorn stone building with sagging eaves and an overgrown garden taken over by brambles. Upon stepping inside, Harper was greeted by a musty aroma and a silence heavy with discontent. The lobby's only source of light was a flickering gas lamp mounted on a wall, its ghostly glow casting monstrous shadows across the faded wallpaper adorned with historical portraits. A solitary desk, scarred by time and neglect, awaited her check-in. The inn's only attendant, a gaunt man named Elias with eyes as deep and somber as a midnight abyss, looked up from his ledger. "Miss Reed, welcome to the Black Hallow," he said in a brittle tone that hinted at secrets buried deep within his soul. "Your room is prepared, but do take heed. A storm is coming, and the night here is unkind to visitors." Despite the cryptic warning, Harper's curiosity only deepened. "Thank you, Elias," she replied politely, masking the flutter of apprehension that had just begun to stir within her. Her room was at the end of a narrow corridor lined with closed doors bearing names of long-forgotten guests. The heavy oak door creaked as she entered, and Harper immediately noticed a large, ornate mirror hanging above a crackled antique dresser. The mirror's glass was marred by age, distorting reflections into ghostly apparitions. Dismissing a shudder that traced her spine, she unpacked and began to settle into the oppressive silence. The first hour passed uneventfully. Harper sat by the window, listening to the relentless patter of rain on the ancient roof. Determined to write, she opened her notebook and began crafting a tale of isolation and despair. But as midnight approached, the true nature of the Black Hallow stirred in the shadows. It began with soft whispers, a murmur indistinct yet laden with longing, emanating from the mirror. Harper's pen faltered as she stared at the reflective surface, half expecting to see a figure behind her. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice trembling. The room responded not with words, but with the cold draft that swept over her, extinguishing her candle and leaving her in total darkness. Clutching her phone for its weak light, Harper's pulse hammered in her ears. A low, resonant voice echoed from within the mirror. "Free me." The plea seemed to seep from every pore of the glass, carrying with it a sorrowful desperation that chilled Harper's blood. Heart pounding, she approached the mirror. In its fractured reflection, she saw more than her own pale face. Behind her, flickering between the cracks of light and shadow, was a gaunt figure, a woman draped in tattered lace, eyes brimming with unshed tears. The apparition's pallor was unsettling, as if death itself had left its imprint on her skin. "Who are you?" Harper managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The specter's gaze locked onto hers, and in a voice that resonated with the despair of countless lost souls, she replied, "I am Annalise. I was wronged, left to languish in this cursed corridor of time. Release me, Harper." A surge of inexplicable recognition, as if the inn and its captive spirit were intimately entwined with Harper's own haunted history, surged through her. She recalled fragments of childhood tales, like secret whispers passed down in hushed family gatherings about a distant relative who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Now it seemed that fate and terror had converged in this night of unholy revelations. The following nights became a macabre cycle of terror and revelation. Harper's attempts to write her novel were relentlessly interrupted by spectral visits. In the dim glow of her desk lamp, she recorded frantic messages to an editor who now wondered about her increasingly incoherent emails and frantic phone calls. "I keep hearing voices, and the mirror, she speaks to me. I can't tell what's real anymore." Her words were met with concern, yet nothing could prepare anyone for the events unfolding at the Black Hallow. Each night, Annalise's presence grew stronger. The whispering escalated from soft pleas to sharp cries, reverberating through the corridors of the inn. In moments of utter dread, Harper would find herself standing in the empty hall outside her room, compelled by a force beyond her control. The voice would beckon her, drawing her into rooms where time seemed to fracture, spaces filled with relics of past atrocities. In one such encounter, Harper wandered into the long-forgotten ballroom, where spectral figures danced slowly in an endless waltz. Their faces were distorted with agony, their eyes burned with the need to be remembered. Among them, Annalise appeared again, her mouth forming silent screams as she reached for Harper with trembling hands. Desperate to understand the curse, Harper sought out Elias. At the inn's creaking reception desk, the old man regarded her with a pitiful sadness. "Miss Reed, the Black Hallow is no ordinary place," he murmured, his eyes darting to the darkened corners as if expecting to see unseen horrors lurking. "This inn was built upon a land steeped in sorrow, a convergence of broken promises and unspeakable crimes. Annalise was once a guardian of secrets, imprisoned within these walls after witnessing horrors no mortal should bear. Her soul and those of many others remain trapped, tormented by the sins of the past. The mirror you see in your room is her prison, and her voice." Harper's mind raced with the implications. With each new discovery, the boundary between her nightmares and reality blurred. Determined to break the cycle of suffering, she scoured the inn for clues. Hidden behind a bookshelf in the shadowed archives of the lobby, she found a bundle of yellowed papers, a series of diary entries penned by Annalise herself. The writings recounted a time of hope and betrayal. Annalise, a compassionate woman with an unyielding sense of justice, had been entrusted with secrets of a powerful family accused of dark arts and ritualistic practices. When she refused to remain silent, she was framed for heinous crimes and locked away in the inn's hidden chambers, where the energies of despair bound her to the mirror. Night after night, the inn's sinister heartbeat pulsed with the voices of the damned. Thunder clapped overhead, and lightning revealed fleeting images of grotesque figures in the hallways. One particularly harrowing evening, as rain splattered against the weathered windows, Harper sat by the mirror, determined to confront the malevolent force that haunted her. "Annalise," she said firmly, her voice laced with resolve, "I will help you. I want to know the full truth, even if it shatters me." For a long, excruciating moment, silence reigned until the mirror began to shimmer violently. The surface rippled like the surface of a disturbed pond, and then with a forceful lurch, the reflection of Annalise emerged fully into Harper's vision. "There is a way," the spirit whispered, her tone both pleading and resigned. "A ritual, hidden in the very fabric of the inn, can sever the ties that bind me here. But it comes with a cost. To free us, you must endure the visions of our torment. You will be burdened with the memories of every sorrow, every betrayal, and every injustice that was wrought in this cursed place." Harper hesitated, the weight of the sacrifice pressing down on her. But the echoes of Annalise's tortured pleas, intertwined with her own desperate yearning for redemption, left her no choice. "Tell me," Harper said, her hand trembling as she reached for the diary entries. "Tell me what must be done." The instructions unfolded like a tapestry of dread. Beneath the main staircase lay a hidden chamber where the accursed relics of the inn's dark past were ensnared by a spectral ritual. On the floor of this chamber, inscribed in a language older than time, were verses that bound the souls of the wronged. Harper was to recite the incantations aloud, her voice uniting with the cries of the lost, setting in motion the dismantling of the curse. Each word would draw upon her deepest fears, and each verse would force her to confront the unholy truths that had remained locked away in the heart of the Black Hallow. Armed with the newfound knowledge and determination, Harper made her way to the hidden chamber. The narrow, cobweb-laden staircase creaked underfoot as she descended into the bowels of the inn. The air grew frigid and heavy with the residue of dark memories. At the bottom, in a cavernous space lit only by sporadic flashes of lightning through shattered windows, she found the ancient inscription etched into the cold stone floor. It spiraled in cryptic patterns, each symbol writhing with malevolent energy. Summoning the courage to face the abyss, Harper began the incantation. Her voice quivered at first, but with each recited line, a strange resonance built within her, a harmonic echo that mirrored the tortured screams of the countless souls trapped within. As the final syllables left her lips, the chamber erupted with an otherworldly glow. The spectral forms that had haunted the Black Hallow materialized around her, their anguished visages flickering in and out of existence. For a moment, time itself seemed to fracture. Harper's mind was flooded with visions. She saw glimpses of unbridled cruelty, of wrongful imprisonment, and unspeakable acts committed in the name of power and greed. She beheld Annalise's life unraveling in vivid hues of despair and horror, the moment she was betrayed by those she had once trusted, the betrayal that sealed her fate within the mirror, and the endless nights of suffering that followed. Each vision scorched Harper's consciousness, etching the memory of sin so deep that it threatened to consume her entirely. But amidst the chaos of visions, a singular presence shone with pure sorrow and defiance. Annalise, radiant in her pain, reached out to Harper. "You have freed us?" she murmured as her form began to waver, her eyes filled with both gratitude and an eternal sadness. "But remember, the darkness we have borne for so long will forever leave its mark on you. Our memories are now yours, as testament to the human capacity for cruelty and redemption." The spectral figures, their existence tethered no longer by ancient bindings, ascended into the ether, their mournful cries dissolving into silence. As the glow subsided, the chamber slowly returned to its oppressive darkness, the curse visibly lifted from its stone floor. Harper, shaken and forever altered, made her ascent back to her room. The storm outside had waned, and dawn's tentative light began to seep through the broken windows. In the days that followed, Harper struggled to return to a semblance of normalcy. The memories of the Black Hallow haunted her every step, a mix of whispered lamentations in the quiet moments and the searing agony of visions that refused to fade with the light of day. Yet in her heart there was a fragile spark of hope. She knew that the curse was broken, and in telling the true horror of what had transpired, she hoped to warn a world too blind to the suffering born of its own actions. Harper transformed her ordeal into a dark, unflinching narrative that resonated with readers far beyond the reach of the Black Hallow. Her novel became a chronicle of human frailty, the cruelty lurking in forgotten corners, and the redemption that can emerge from confronting unspeakable horrors. Even as she tried to move on, every creak of the floor at midnight and every fleeting shadow in her peripheral vision reminded her of the night she summoned the past and was forever marked by it. Late one evening, as Harper sat by her desk penning what she hoped would be her final chapter, a soft knock echoed from her study door. Startled, she rose slowly and opened it to find no one there, only a gentle, ephemeral breeze that carried a familiar, haunting whisper. "Thank you." In that fleeting moment, as the specter of gratitude and sorrow mingled on the edge of reality, Harper understood that some horrors, once encountered, never truly leave us. They become woven into the fabric of our existence, a constant reminder that beneath the veneer of everyday life, dark stories lie waiting in the shadows of our minds. And so, as Harper's tale reached its final pages, those who read it felt an inexplicable chill and an enduring sense that the darkness was never far away, that true horror lies not in monstrous apparitions, but in the memories of our very souls.
Story number 3.
In the remote outskirts of a forgotten town, where the narrow country roads wound through fields of withered corn and the wind seemed to whisper long-forgotten secrets, there lay an abandoned carnival ground known by locals as the Carnival of Lost Souls. Its rusted sign, half obscured by creeping ivy and the relentless march of time, still bore the faded words, "Merrick's Spectacular Carnival." At night, the air turned bitter and cold, as if carrying the echoes of laughter and cries from an era when bright lights and raucous music masked the darkness lurking beneath. Ava Monroe had always been drawn to mystery, a passion that had spurred her to document the haunted corners of America for her blog. When rumors of strange lights and eerie music emanating from Merrick's grounds began to surface, she couldn't resist the lure. With a digital recorder in one hand and a notebook clutched in the other, Ava set out one chilly October evening, determined to capture what lay hidden in the shadows. The carnival, once a vibrant collection of rides and booths, now resembled a graveyard of dreams. The enormous carousel, its painted horses dulled and Chip creaked slowly as the wind coaxed it into a reluctant turn. Abandoned stalls, where long-forgotten prizes hung forlornly, jutted out between weeds and shattered glass, each whispering tales of jubilant moments gone awry. Ava's boots crunched over fallen leaves and broken glass as she made her way to the ticket booth at the carnival's center. As she approached the booth, Ava noticed that the darkness here was unnervingly complete. Even the moon, high in the sky, seemed to cower behind thick clouds. The door of the booth swung open as if pushed by an unseen hand. With a hesitant push, she stepped inside, and the stale air hit her like a torrent. On a dusty counter, a single cracked mirror reflected not only her image, but hinted at movement behind her. Heart pounding, she turned swiftly. There was nothing there, only the silence that pressed in on her from every corner. "Hello?" Ava's voice broke the stillness. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a soft, yet distinct, chuckle drifted from behind the mirror, a sound that was more a murmur of regret than mirth. "You came. At last," it whispered, the voice layered with old pain and insidious amusement. Ava froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice faltering slightly, despite her determination. From the murky depths behind the mirror, the faint image of a gaunt man in a tattered carnival uniform materialized. His eyes, dark and sorrowful, glimmered in the half-light. "I am Niles," he said in a tone both gentle and unnerving. "I once ran this carnival. I'm afraid my show never ended." Ava's pulse raced. "What do you mean, never ended?" she asked, her curiosity battling the terror rising within her. Niles's face contorted into a grimace of remembered sorrow. "We were all trapped here in a cycle of misery and illusions. The laughter masked the curse laid upon us by those who never cared for souls. It was a bargain, a desperate bid for fortune that turned our dreams into eternal nightmares. And now, you've come to break the silence, or to join it." Shaken yet resolute, Ava steadied herself. "I'm not here to join you, Niles. I want to know the truth. Why are you still here?" Before he could reply, the door behind Ava slammed shut, reverberating through the empty booth like a death knell. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew impossibly heavy. Niles's spectral form wavered, and the carnival itself seemed to come alive around her. In the distance, the broken Calliope keys rattled and a distorted melody began to swell, echoing eerily across the grounds. Unable to resist the call, Ava left the booth and wandered into the maze of attractions. The sound of her footsteps mingled with the distant, ghostly music. Every rusted ride and shattered mirror reflected fragments of a past that clung to the present. As she passed the derelict funhouse, the glass panels of its facade trembled as if breathing. Flickering lights hinted at shadows moving in unnatural rhythms behind the twisted corridors. Inside the funhouse, the air was stale and claustrophobic. Ava's flashlight beam danced erratically across warped mirrors and grimy walls covered in peeling paint. Somewhere within those warped reflections, she thought she saw images, faces contorted in silent screams caught in a moment of eternal agony. Drawn inexorably towards the deepest part of the funhouse, she heard a soft, childlike giggle that sent shivers down her spine. "Is someone there?" Ava called softly, stepping further into the distorted labyrinth. The giggle faded, replaced by a whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Play with us, forever." The voice was not malicious, it was mournful, a lament for lost innocence. Her heart nearly stopping, Ava pressed on. Through a cracked door at the end of a narrow corridor, she entered a small room that had once served as the carnival's tent for fortune-telling. The table was covered in faded velvet, and a tarnished crystal ball sat on a lace-trimmed cloth. As she drew closer to the table, the air thrummed with an otherworldly energy. She reached out tentatively and touched the crystal ball. At once, the room darkened, and the swirling mists within the sphere coalesced into a scene that blotted out reality. In the crystal's depths, Ava saw the carnival in its original splendor, a riot of color, laughter, and light. But then, the image shifted. In horrifying clarity, she witnessed the moment of the fateful curse. The carnival owner, a man with eyes full of greed, made a pact with a dark entity, sealing the fate of every performer and spectator caught in the magic of that night. The once vibrant carnival transformed into a macabre stage where souls were pawned for a cruel bargain. Ava recoiled as the vision faded, replaced by the solemn face of a woman who had been a star performer, a contortionist named Celeste. Her eyes, filled with despair, gazed into Ava's very soul. "You must remember us," Celeste intoned in a voice thick with sorrow. "Only by witnessing our endless torment can you break the curse." Over the next few hours, reality and nightmare blended into one indistinguishable tapestry. As the wind howled through the empty tents and the decrepit rides shuddered in uncanny unison, Ava found herself drawn to a large marquee pitched at the edge of the carnival grounds. Its once grand sign now announced the final performance in looping, distorted script. Inside, the remnants of an audience lay scattered, figures in antique costumes, their eyes empty, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and longing. At the center of the marquee, a solitary figure waited behind a dilapidated curtain. It was Celeste, her form illuminated by a ghostly, pale light. "You must help us," she pleaded as she stepped forward. "Free us from this endless cycle of despair." Ava swallowed hard. "How? What can I do?" she asked, voice trembling as she surveyed the desolation around her. Celeste offered a fragile smile, as if rekindling a spark of hope. The curse was bound with each performance, sealed with fear and blood. Only by reenacting the final act with the truth revealed can the darkness be dispelled. You must venture beyond the veil to the heart of our torment and set our memories free. Before Ava could respond, the sound of clanging metal and distant screams erupted around her. The carnival grounds morphed into a battleground of spectral chaos. Shadows swirled with malevolent intent. Figures darted between the ruined attractions, their whispers merging into a cacophony of despair. In the midst of this spectral storm, voices cried out, "Don't let the darkness win. Save us!" Desperation gave Ava the resolve to act. Guided by a mixture of terror and a need to atone for forgotten sins of the past, she followed Celeste through a labyrinth of corridors behind the marquee. The narrow passageway led her to an old supply room. Piles of broken props and dusty memorabilia filled the space, and in its center lay a heavy, iron-bound book, its cover embossed with cryptic symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. Celeste pointed to the book with a trembling hand. "This grimoire contains the ritual to break the curse, words etched in a time when hope still existed. Recite them under the midnight moon, and with your voice, awaken the souls that have been trapped." Ava hesitated, glancing around at the gathering phantoms whose eyes pleaded silently for redemption. The boundaries of her own reality were crumbling, yet she knew this was the only path to salvation, both for the lost souls and for herself. Gathering her resolve, she opened the book. The pages crackled under her touch, and an oppressive air of dread filled the room as she read the ancient incantations aloud. As the words left her lips, the room transformed. The oppressive gloom lifted ever so slightly, replaced by a luminescent haze. Outside, the restless carnival grounds stilled. The spectral figures paused mid-scream, their anguished voices softening into a single mournful refrain. Ava's voice grew stronger, resonating with the deep timbre of her determination. By the light of truth and the weight of regret, I call upon the souls of Merrick's carnival to be free, she intoned, the incantation reverberating off the walls like a celestial bell tolling for the lost. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then a brilliant, searing light burst forth from the book, illuminating every corner of the forsaken carnival. The carousel's creaking slowed to a gentle, almost hypnotic turn. Shadows peeled away from the ruins of rides and booths, converging toward the marquee. In the center of the spectral audience, Celeste and Niles, now both shimmering with an ethereal glow, advanced, their faces softening from the countenance of eternal agony to one of bittersweet relief. "You have done what we could not," whispered Celeste, her voice a delicate murmur that mixed gratitude with the sorrow of countless years. "Our souls are unbound at last." Ava fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the catharsis of the moment and the raw surge of emotions that flooded her. The surrounding spirits began to fade, their expressions transforming from despair to peaceful resignation. In that same heartbeat, the carnival's cursed magic released its grip, the sinister energy dissipating like mist before the morning sun. But as the light receded, Ava felt a lingering chill, an echo of the despair that had once permeated the place. The final act of the ritual had been completed, but the cost was etched onto her very being. In her heart and mind, the voices of the freed souls would forever echo, a reminder of the eternal vigilance required to keep darkness at bay. In the silent aftermath, the carnival grounds lay still and benign. The ticket booth's door swung gently in the breeze, and even the once menacing Calliope now lay silent and inert. Ava gathered the iron-bound grimoire and made one last sojourn through the carnival, documenting every detail in her notebook. Each observation, every whispered secret, was now a part of her, a burden and a testament to the lives once lived and the horror that nearly claimed them. As dawn crept over the horizon, Ava emerged from the carnival with the weight of 1,000 untold stories on her shoulders. She knew that her life had changed irrevocably, that the haunting beauty of tragedy and loss would forever be her constant companions. Her recordings, once intended as mere stories for her blog, were now the legacy of a place where the line between nightmare and reality had blurred, and where lost souls found their final farewell. In the weeks that followed, Ava's account of Merrick's spectacular carnival spread through the whispers of midnight and the quiet headlines of local newspapers. Many dismissed it as the ramblings of an overactive imagination, while others felt the same chill that she had experienced as they passed the abandoned grounds. And every so often, on a cold, moonless night, a solitary traveler would hear the soft strains of a long-forgotten melody, as if the carnival was calling them to remember the final performance, a performance of lost souls finding peace at last.
Story number 4.
In the desolate reaches of northern Maine, where the forests grow dense and tangled like the thoughts of a troubled mind, an old structure stood in grim isolation. Blackwater Asylum, its name whispered in fearful reverence by locals, had long been abandoned after a series of unspeakable tragedies. The building's crumbling facade, cloaked in ivy and the scars of time, guarded secrets darker than the stormiest night. It was here that Elena Rivera, a determined documentarian with a passion for the macabre, decided to confront the legacy of human despair that had festered for decades. Elena had spent years uncovering forgotten atrocities and forbidden experiments, and the asylum, rumored to be the site of unethical treatments and the haunted remnants of shattered minds, promised a story that transcended conventional horror. Armed with a digital recorder, a handheld camera, and a notebook frayed by constant use, she crossed the threshold into the forsaken institution on a chilled autumn evening. The heavy iron door groaned in protest as Elena pushed it open, unleashing a cold gust of putrid air that carried echoes of anguished cries and muffled sobs. The lobby was a cavernous space where peeling paint, shattered glass, and overturned furniture testified to years of neglect and untold misery. A single overhead light, sputtering weakly, cast long, jittery shadows that danced over walls adorned with cryptic graffiti and faded warnings. Every step Elena took on the cracked-tiled floor resonated as if alerting the dormant specters that waited in the silence. As she ventured deeper into the asylum's bowels, Elena's flashlight revealed corridor after corridor lined with rusted doors and remnants of decayed office files. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with the palpable weight of forgotten sorrow. In one dusty room, she discovered scattered patient files, journals, and scribbled notes that hinted at experiments, procedures performed in the name of curing madness, but which instead inflicted torment. Names like Alice M. and Jonas P. were smudged out as if erased to hide the truth of the horror inflicted upon them. A sudden clatter behind her made Elena whirl around, heart pounding. For a moment, the air itself seemed to ripple with a presence unseen. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing in the empty hall. No answer came except the distant hum of malfunctioning lights and a soft, almost imperceptible whisper that brushed against her ear. "Leave," it sighed. So quiet she wasn't sure if it was merely her imagination or something far more sinister. With renewed determination to uncover the asylum's secrets, Elena pressed on. Her next stop was the infamous treatment wing, once a place of experiment and abuse. There, faded murals depicting idealistic visions of healing had been defaced by hasty warnings and desperate messages written in red, stained by what could only be dried blood. One phrase repeated itself throughout. "They will remember, they must remember." The recurring words sent an icy shiver down her spine, prompting her to record the chilling messages verbatim. In the center of the hall, a battered wheelchair sat abandoned, the plush, its metal frame twisted as though contorted by unseen hands. Elena approached it slowly, her camera capturing every detail of the decay and despair. As she knelt to examine a set of fingerprints smeared across the armrest, a sudden voice filled the corridor, a voice filled with a hollow sorrow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Please, help us," it murmured, barely audible beneath the constant drip of water from the broken pipes overhead. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" she demanded, clutching her recorder tightly. The sound reverberated back softly, as if the building itself were speaking, and then fell silent, leaving an oppressive void in its wake. Undeterred by terror, she continued on to what the files described as the isolation ward. There, in a long, narrow cell block with barred windows that looked out onto a forgotten world of darkness, the air was thick with despair. In one cell, the rusted door creaked open at her touch, revealing rows of faded bed rails and a crude sketch etched on the wall. The sketch, a depiction of a woman with anguished eyes and elongated fingers, seemed to pulse under the beam of her flashlight, as if it were breathing life into the frozen horror of the past. Elena could almost feel the weight of that tortured spirit pressing in on her, desperate for recognition. As she wandered the corridor, her mind began to replay half-remembered fragments of local legends about the asylum. Rumors spoke of a head nurse, Eleanor Graves, who had once ruled the ward with a vicious blend of misguided compassion and cruel authority. It was whispered that Nurse Graves had become haunted by the souls of patients whose lives she had irrevocably damaged, and that she had stayed behind after her death, a wraith condemned to wander the halls, tormented by regret and denial. Elena wondered if the sorrowful whispers she heard were those of the dead nurse, or perhaps the anguished victims of her wrath. Reaching the administration section, Elena discovered an ornate office, its grandeur eroded by neglect but still marked by the remnants of better days. At its center was an imposing desk, behind which sat a dusty portrait of Nurse Graves in her full regalia, her stern, accusing eyes seeming to follow Elena's every move. Summoning her courage, Elena spoke softly to the image. "Nurse Graves, if you are here, show me your truth." For several long, agonizing moments, nothing responded except the dull echo of her own words. Then, as if the spirit of the nurse had decided to break her silence, the portrait's eyes seemed to glisten with a deep, mournful sadness. A raspy voice, heavy with regret, emanated from the darkened corner of the room. "I was meant to save them, but I only imprisoned their souls." The revelation startled Elena, who felt the room suddenly grow colder as the presence of the nurse filled the space. "Who imprisoned them?" she asked cautiously. "What happened here?" The response came in fragmented whispers, a medley of sorrowful confessions and tormented promises. The experiments, the fear, betrayal. The words hung in the air, each one carrying the weight of irrevocable guilt and eternal torment. Determined to piece together the puzzle, Elena consulted a stack of journals she had salvaged from the records room. Carefully flipping through brittle pages, she uncovered a narrative of unspeakable cruelty. Patients diagnosed with mental disorders were subjected to brutal treatments in the name of reform, while the staff, under immense pressure to yield results, resorted to experimental procedures that left scars far deeper than any incision. Nurse Graves, it seemed, had once been a kind soul, but driven by the demands of the institution and the horrors she witnessed, she had become increasingly unhinged. In one particularly damning entry, a nurse described a final experiment intended to erase a patient's memories, but instead, it imprisoned that patient's very essence, forever binding their spirit to the walls of Blackwater Asylum. Outside, as a bitter wind howled like the keening of lost souls, Elena felt a creeping dread that she was no longer alone. Shadows lengthened and contorted along the corridors, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed despite her solitary presence. Every creak in the ancient building seemed to speak of hidden suffering and eternal regret. The building itself was a living, breathing graveyard of memories. While reviewing the journals in the relative safety of the main hall, Elena was startled by the abrupt appearance of a spectral figure. It was the faint, translucent form of a young man, his clothes tattered and eyes brimming with sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered urgently, his voice carrying a timbre of desperation that froze Elena in place. "They never let us go." "Who are you?" Elena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The apparition's gaze fell upon her with an intensity that pierced through her facade of calm. "I'm Daniel, one of the forgotten," he replied, "trapped in the aftermath of their cruelty. They," his form wavered as if caught between worlds, "they used us as experiments, and now our pain festers in these halls." Before Elena could press him for more answers, Daniel's translucent form began to fade, merging with the darkness as if unwilling or unable to remain. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, a void punctuated only by the soft drip of water and the distant hum of a mechanism long dead. Yet in that silence, Elena understood that every step forward was a descent deeper into a labyrinth of malevolence and despair. The night pressed on, and as Elena ventured further into the lower levels of the asylum, she found herself in the remnants of an underground operating theater. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered across stained metal tables, and the walls were emblazoned with cryptic scrawlings, a mixture of desperate pleas, cryptic symbols, and the names of those who suffered. In the center of the room, a single operating light hung precariously from the ceiling, its weak glow revealing a mosaic of bloodstains and scorch marks. Every detail whispered of a tragedy too horrific for words. Suddenly, the overhead light sputtered and died, plunging the room into oppressive darkness. Elena's breath caught, and the oppressive silence was shattered by the sound of labored breathing, not her own, but echoing from the corners of the room. "Help me," a voice whimpered, a sound so raw and desperate that it reverberated within the deepest recesses of her soul. Elena fumbled for her flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness to reveal vague shapes drifting at the edge of perception. The sight of a figure, barely discernible and weeping inconsolably, compelled her forward. "Please," the figure pleaded as Elena drew near, "find forgiveness. Find a way to set us free." In that moment, the realization struck her. The tortured souls of Blackwater Asylum were bound not only by the physical remnants of their suffering, but by a curse wrought from the cruelty of unchecked ambition and fear. Their release required the truth to be acknowledged, a reckoning that would expose every hidden atrocity. With trembling resolve, Elena began to document everything in meticulous detail, her voice recorder capturing every desperate whisper and every lament of the unseen. She resolved that these stories, the pain and the horror engraved in every corner of the asylum, would not be forgotten. In the process, she might also unlock the secret to liberating the lost spirits, offering them the redemption they so desperately sought. At the stroke of midnight, beneath a vaulted ceiling that had seen too much sorrow, Elena found herself drawn to a narrow staircase leading to a subterranean chamber, a place spoken of in hushed tones among the asylum's darker legends. The chamber's heavy stone door was etched with symbols that pulsed with an eerie luminescence in the sparse beam of her flashlight. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open and entered what could only be described as the heart of the darkness. Inside, the chamber was dominated by an enormous stone altar surrounded by scattered relics, rusted medical instruments, dried blood splatters, and pages torn from the very journals that had documented the ordeal of those long forgotten. The air was thick with the residue of despair, and as Elena approached the altar, she felt an almost imperceptible vibration, like the beating of 1,000 imprisoned hearts. A spectral assembly began to form around the altar. Faded figures of former patients and staff emerged from the shadows, their eyes hollow yet pleading. In the midst of them appeared a more distinct figure, a woman with a stern face softened by immeasurable grief. It was Nurse Graves, her once authoritative gaze now transformed by endless remorse. "Elena," she intoned, her voice a mournful requiem that resonated with every soul in the chamber. "The truth you seek is not for the faint of heart. To set us free, you must bear witness and speak our stories, even if it shatters you." Elena's heart pounded fiercely as she responded, "I will tell your truth. I promise that your suffering will not be in vain." In that solemn vow, the chamber seemed to sigh, as if a centuries-old burden was finally eased, if only slightly. The spectral congregation, in a final fragile unity, advanced toward the altar. The ghostly figures spoke in unison, a litany of confessions and pleas. "Remember us, forgive us, set us free." Their voices, each a thread of sorrow, wove together into a chorus that filled every corner of the forsaken chamber. The energy in the room shifted, a palpable relief mingled with an eternal sadness. As the clock tolled the midnight hour, the ancient curse that had bound so many souls began to dissipate like mist in the early dawn. For a long, heart-wrenching moment, Elena remained frozen in the surreal haze of absolution and agony. She felt their gratitude and the enormity of the sacrifice they had endured, a sacrifice that now rested upon her shoulders. With renewed determination and a soul forever marked by the spectral confessions, Elena vowed to share the story of Blackwater Asylum with the world, exposing every hidden atrocity and honoring every forgotten life. As she left the subterranean chamber, the oppressive atmosphere of the asylum seemed to lift ever so slightly, replaced by a bittersweet quietude, a silence that spoke of closure and a promise of peace at last. Yet, Elena knew that the memories of that night would remain with her, etched into her mind like the scars upon the ancient walls. The asylum's legacy of horror would never truly vanish. It would live on in every whisper's recollection, every shudder in the dark, and every echo of a plea for redemption. Emerging into the cold pre-dawn light, Elena felt both the weight of history and the fragile hope of absolution. The pages of her notebook and the recordings of her digital device were now more than evidence of unspeakable horror. They were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of relentless despair. Though the physical walls of Blackwater Asylum might crumble with time, the stories of its inhabitants, their laughter, pain, and ultimate yearning for freedom, would endure. A solemn reminder that even in the deepest darkness, truth could kindle a light strong enough to set even the most tormented souls free.
Story number 5.
On a storm-lashed autumn night, when the Atlantic winds howled like vengeful spirits and the tide battered ancient cliffs with relentless fury, a solitary figure trudged along a narrow footpath toward the edge of the world. The old lighthouse, known simply as Morro's Beacon, stood defiantly at the precipice, a towering sentinel of peeling white paint and rusting iron, its light long extinguished by the passage of time. For decades, locals of the nearby coastal town of Harrow's Edge spoke in hushed whispers about the tragedy that befell the lighthouse keepers and the unnatural events that transpired after that fatal night. Tonight, those whispered legends would collide with harsh reality. Elias Munro was not a man given to superstition. A seasoned maritime historian with a skeptic's eye for detail, he had come to Harrow's Edge with one singular purpose: to unearth the long-forgotten records of the mysterious shipwreck and the lighthouse incident that had stained local lore. Yet as he pushed open the creaking wrought iron gate leading to the lighthouse grounds, Elias couldn't help but feel an inexplicable chill, a cold that seemed to seep into his bones and whisper warnings he couldn't quite decipher. The approach was treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted out from the crashing surf, and the bitter winds tossed fallen leaves in swirling eddies around his legs. As Elias advanced, every crunch of gravel underfoot echoed like the footsteps of long-departed souls. He made mental notes on his recorder while snapping pictures of every detail. The dark, swollen eyes of the stone gargoyles perched on the parapet, the rotting wooden panels clinging desperately to the structure, and the ancient carvings worn smooth by time. Each element painted a picture of decay, neglect, and an undeniable malevolence that hung over the area like a shroud. Inside the lighthouse's entrance, the air was thick with the odor of salt, mold, and something coppery, an aroma Elias recognized too well from old blood and rust. His flashlight beam danced over the walls, revealing the remnants of a life once filled with purpose. Faded maritime charts, battered logbooks, and a rusted key lay scattered about like relics of a forgotten time. In one corner, Elias discovered a staircase spiraling upward in a narrow, confining helix, the only route to the lantern room where the great light had once shone its beacon of hope across stormy seas. Climbing the stairs, Elias was greeted by an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the groaning wind and the distant, mournful crash of waves. On the landing, his light caught a framed photograph leaning against a dusty wooden wall. The sepia image showed a group of lighthouse keepers, their faces etched with pride and determination. At the center stood a woman with eyes full of quiet sorrow, a woman whose name Elias later learned from the logbooks was Margaret Morrow. The records hinted that she had been the lighthouse's heart, caring for both the light and her small, isolated family living in the keeper's quarters below. But a catastrophic storm had taken everything from her, and some whispered that her spirit, and those of the doomed crew, never truly left the place. The upper gallery opened into the lantern room, a cavernous space crowned by shattered glass and rusted metal. Here, the relics of the past merged with the palpable presence of something otherworldly. As Elias swept his light across the room, he noted an odd formation on the wall. A series of handprints, smeared as though pressed by desperate, moist palms. They were not the neatly arrayed prints of a family portrait, but chaotic and raw, as if made during moments of terror and despair. Suddenly, a rasping whisper slithered through the darkness. "Leave or suffer," it hissed, each syllable laden with centuries of agony. Elias froze, his heart pounding in disbelief. He couldn't fathom how his logical mind would reconcile the horror of a ghostly threat with the very tangible evidence he had just unearthed. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice echoing against cold stone. For a brief moment, the silence that followed was more alarming than any clamor. Then came another whisper, closer this time, trembling with pain and regret. "Margaret, we are lost." Elias's skepticism began to waver. He raised his recorder with trembling fingers, capturing the spectral voices as they mingled with the sound of his own stuttered breath. The room seemed to pulse as the wind from the storm outside battered the very structure, and he felt as if he were standing at the crossroads of the living and the damned. Determined to understand what was unfolding, Elias slowly made his way to a heavy door at the back of the lantern room. Carved into the oak was an insignia, a broken compass rose, its points jagged and misaligned. It was marked with the initials MM, and he recalled that Margaret Morrow had been known as both a keeper and a guardian. With effort, he pushed the door open, revealing a narrow corridor lined with old storage chests and stacks of moldering documents. The corridor's oppressive gloom was further accentuated by faint strains of music, an almost imperceptible, melancholic tune that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. As he followed the sound, the corridor opened into a small chamber. It was there that Elias discovered an ancient phonograph resting atop a pedestal, its horn cracked and covered in dust. Remarkably, the record was still in place, etched with the word redemption. With an uncharacteristic mix of dread and fascination, Elias reached out and set the needle gently into the groove. The machine wheezed to life, releasing the mournful strains of a waltz, a haunting melody that filled the chamber with a tangible sadness. But as the music played, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the images of long-lost memories surged before his eyes. In a sudden disorienting moment, Elias saw them. Spectral forms of the lighthouse keepers, their figures translucent, yet painfully vivid. They moved slowly, their expressions tortured, and their eyes locked onto him with a sorrow that defied time. Margaret herself appeared at the head of the procession, her voice soft and imploring. "We waited for someone who could break the cycle," she murmured. "We are trapped by our regrets, by promises unfulfilled." Elias's rational mind struggled against the tide of the supernatural revelation. Who, what do you want from me? He asked, his voice trembling as he recorded every word. The apparition of Margaret advanced, her form flickering in and out of focus. The curse of this beacon is bound to our sorrow, she replied. Long ago, we made vows to guide the lost, but we were deceived. Our trust was betrayed, and our souls imprisoned in perpetual mourning. Only by facing the truth can we be set free. Help us remember so that we may finally rest. The room, now a nexus of spectral energy and agony, seemed to pull Elias into its depths. The air vibrated with the echoes of the past, and every word spoken resonated with an otherworldly power. Elias, driven by equal parts fear and compassion, vowed to reveal the truth behind the lighthouse's dark legacy. His mind raced with questions. Who had betrayed these keepers? What secret lay hidden in the records that he had begun to uncover? And most hauntingly, how could he free these souls without damning himself to an eternity of their sorrow? Over the following days, Elias immersed himself in the local archives at Harrow's Edge, poring over brittle documents and maritime logs that recounted the events surrounding the catastrophic storm decades earlier. He discovered that on that fateful night, a wealthy shipowner had colluded with corrupt officials to secure exclusive rights to a new shipping route, deliberately diverting aid during the storm to ensure that the lighthouse keeper's warnings went unheeded. In exchange, the conspirators had secured a fortune, leaving the keepers to perish in isolation. Margaret Morrow had given her life trying to guide a doomed vessel to safety, and her death, along with that of her colleagues, had been concealed by a facade of bureaucratic misfortune. Every piece of evidence confirmed that the tragedy was not an accident, but a calculated act of greed and betrayal. The injustice weighed heavily on Elias's conscience, and as he recorded his findings, he felt the spectral presence of Margaret's sadness intensify with every uncovered secret. Each night, when he returned to Morrow's beacon to continue his work, the voices grew louder, the apparitions more insistent. Sometimes he heard anguished cries echo from the empty corridors. Sometimes the ghostly waltz played on the phonograph, its melancholy melody serving as both dirge and plea. One particularly moonless night, as Elias sat hunched in a creaky study within the lighthouse keeper's quarters, a violent gust of wind shattered the silence. The door burst open, and the figure of a man, once a steadfast keeper named Samuel, appeared before him. His eyes were hollow, and his expression bore the torment of a man condemned to eternal penance. "You must not linger here," Samuel intoned, his voice a mix of warning and desperate hope. "The truth you seek comes at a cost you are not prepared to pay." Elias's heart hammered in his chest, yet he stood firm. "I have uncovered your story," he replied. "I know of the betrayal, the greed that condemned you all. I want to help you find peace." Samuel's ghostly form wavered, and for a moment the phantom of the betrayed keeper seemed on the verge of despair. "Our penance is ceaseless, bound by curses and sorrow," he said mournfully. "To break the curse, you must be willing to face the darkest parts of human cruelty, parts that may leave scars on your soul that no light can mend." In that moment, Elias realized that his mission was no mere historical investigation. It was a quest for redemption, not only for the lost souls of Morrow's beacon, but for his own spirit. Determined and resolute, he spent the next several days transcribing every detail of the conspiracy, from legal records, personal letters, and eyewitness accounts scattered in dim archives. The more he uncovered, the more the anguished voices of the keepers roared in his ears, their burden now intertwined with his own growing sense of justice. On the seventh night, with a storm raging outside that rivaled the one from decades past, Elias returned to the lantern room armed with his newfound revelations. The room was transformed into a theater of memories. The swirling dust and shadows wove themselves into scenes of that fateful night, and the spectral procession of keepers gathered once more at the center of the ruined chamber. Margaret's apparition rose before him, her face both ethereal and etched with unbearable sorrow. "The truth has been spoken," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "Now you must carry our story to the world so that our suffering may be remembered, and so that our torment may end." As Elias stepped forward, voice steady and resolute, he began to recite the account of betrayal, of how the greedy machinations of men had doomed the souls of Morrow's beacon. His words filled the room. merging with the sorrowful melody of the ghostly waltz emanating from the phonograph. The spectral figures of the keepers closed their eyes as if in prayer, their forms growing fainter with each measured word. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a fragile calm that hinted at the possibility of absolution. But even as the apparitions began to fade into the ether, a final, echoing lament reverberated through the chamber, a voice that seemed to emanate from every fiber of the old lighthouse. Remember us, so that we may be free. In that haunting refrain, Elias felt the weight of history and regret, a solemn promise that he would devote his life to ensuring that the truth of Morrow's beacon would never be silenced by time or greed. In the aftermath, the storm subsided and the first pale rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Elias emerged from the lighthouse forever altered. His recordings, notes, and photographic evidence would become part of an extensive historical account, a testament to the tragic events that had forever scarred Harrow's Edge. Yet, more than that, he carried within him the quiet gratitude of the once-forgotten souls, a gratitude that mingled with an unending sorrow, as if every secret he uncovered carried with it the ghostly imprint of a life lost too soon. Years later, Elias's account would be published as a meticulous chronicle of the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. Scholars, activists, and believers in the supernatural would come to study his findings, and his work would inspire others to seek justice for those long consigned to silence. But on stormy nights, in quiet moments before sleep, Elias sometimes heard the soft strains of a melancholic waltz drifting on the breeze, a bittersweet reminder that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, have the power to echo through time, calling out for remembrance and absolution. And so, even as the lighthouse fell further into ruin, its legacy endured. The people of Harrow's Edge no longer saw Morrow's beacon as a mere relic of a tragic past, but as a solemn monument, a beacon of truth that warned against the reckless pursuit of profit at the cost of human life. It remained a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the true depths of remorse and the transformative power of bearing witness. And on every storm-lashed night, when the winds screamed along the rocky shores, a quiet voice would whisper through the darkness, a promise born of sorrow and hope, remember us.
Story number 6.
Under a bruised twilight sky on a crisp autumn evening, a solitary road led deep into the heartland of a forgotten county, a place where legends clung to the earth like frost in the early dawn. At the end of this desolate stretch lay an ancient orchard, known among locals as the Devil's Orchard. Its gnarled, twisted trees bore fruit that was long rotten, their branches contorted as if in silent agony. The orchard, shunned and whispered about in corners of dim diners and creaking porches, was said to be haunted by memories of a centuries-old curse, a curse born from a tragedy that had stained the land with sorrow and malevolence. Evelyn Cross, a determined folklorist with a knack for unsettling mysteries, had come to document the truth behind these legends. Armed with a battered leather notebook, a digital recorder, and the courage gleaned from years of delving into the uncanny, she arrived in the nearby village at dusk. Villagers eyed her with wary glances as she inquired about the orchard. Old Mr. Dalton, his voice tremulous with both fear and reverence, warned her, "Some truths are meant to be buried with the dead, miss. The orchard, it never forgets." Even as Evelyn absorbed his hushed warning, a steely resolve took hold. She had to discover what lay behind the curse that had terrorized generations. Evelyn's journey to the orchard began along a narrow gravel path enveloped by towering stands of whispering pines. The trees themselves seemed to murmur half-forgotten secrets as the wind toyed with their barren limbs. Every step carried an eerie echo, and the gloom around her deepened until the only sound was the steady crunch of leaves beneath her boots. As she reached the orchard's edge, the twilight deepened into an oppressive shroud. The ancient trees, their bark cracked with age and malevolence, formed a natural barrier, their silhouettes like dark sentinels guarding forbidden secrets. Pushing past the copse of trees, Evelyn found herself in a clearing dotted with twisted apple trees. Their branches drooped low and heavy, and from the ground, clusters of fallen, withered fruit lent a sickly, rotting aroma to the chill air. The entire orchard exuded a palpable sense of despair. Each tree stood as a silent witness to unspeakable events that had occurred long ago. At the heart of the clearing, almost as if planted by fate, lay a weathered stone well. Its surface was etched with symbols that no modern hand could have devised, arcane and maddening in their complexity. She knelt and brushed away the layers of moss and decay, revealing inscriptions that hinted of a ritual and a promise of vengeance. As Evelyn recorded her impressions, a sudden sharp crack of a branch made her look up. There, between the looming trees, a pale figure emerged. A man with eyes like dying embers and a face marred by grief. His voice, laden with an otherworldly sorrow, broke the oppressive silence. "You've come to remember," he said softly, as if speaking to an old friend. "I am Thomas, once the keeper of this orchard. Now I am but a shadow of a life stolen by the curse." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Keeper. What happened here?" she asked, her voice trembling yet determined. Thomas's spectral face twisted in anguish. Many years ago, a wrong was done. A young soul, innocent and bright, was sacrificed to appease a darkness that festered in the earth. The orchard was cursed in blood, a promise sealed by betrayal and sorrow. Every year, on the night of her passing, the orchard awakens to reclaim what was once taken, and those who wander here find themselves lost between the realms of life and death. His voice faded into the rustling of the leaves, leaving behind only the memory of despair. Unnerved, yet spurred on by the desire for truth, Evelyn took out her recorder and pressed on deeper into the orchard. The further she ventured, the thicker the air became with palpable dread. Twisting branches formed grotesque shapes that looked like tortured faces, and a slow drizzle of cold rain began to fall, each drop carrying the chill of forgotten sorrows. Shadows coalesced into vague forms in the corners of her vision, figures that seemed to move with deliberate malice when she wasn't looking directly at them. Approaching the stone well again, Evelyn noticed that an old diary, its leather cover cracked and pages yellowed with time, lay beside it as if placed there by unseen hands. Drawn by an inexplicable force, she picked it up. The diary belonged to a young woman named Lillian, whose tender handwriting chronicled the secrets of the orchard. The entries told of an idyllic time before the curse, when laughter and love filled the air. Then came the fateful night. Lillian's final entry detailed a desperate attempt by her family to bargain with an ancient entity that dwelled beneath the orchard, a creature of primordial darkness. In their hunger for prosperity, they had sealed her fate, offering her as a sacrifice. The last words of the diary read, "May the blood of innocence awaken the wrath of the cursed, and may our sins be paid in shadows." The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the silence. Evelyn clutched the diary as she turned to see a group of figures emerging from the gloom. They were the descendants of those who had been cursed, their faces pale and eyes haunted by ancestral guilt. Their leader, a gaunt woman draped in threadbare garments, stepped forward. "You should not have come here, outsider," she hissed in a voice that trembled with fear and rage. "This ground is steeped in unending sorrow, and every soul here pays the price." "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice stronger than she expected. "We are the forgotten kin," the woman replied, her eyes flickering with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. "Our family, our blood, was forever tainted by that unholy act. Every year the orchard calls, and every year we are forced to relive our guilt. It seeks to claim another innocent soul to balance our debt. Tonight, it hungers again. You have stirred a wrath that has slumbered for decades." In that charged moment, the wind intensified, and an eerie chorus of voices began to swell around her, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very soil. The ground trembled as the ancient curse awakened. The once dormant trees shuddered, and petals of rotten fruit fell like macabre confetti in the harsh wind. Lillian's voice, young and anguished, resonated in the air, pleading for mercy. "Forgive me," it cried repeatedly, as if each syllable was carried on the breeze with crushing weight. Evelyn's mind raced. She felt the weight of Lillian's sorrow and the ancestral guilt of the kin pressing down on her. Determined to end the cycle of vengeance, she urged, "I will help you. I will learn your story and share it so that the curse may be lifted." The kin's leader regarded her warily, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How can you free us, knowing that the suffering is eternal?" she whispered, voice soft as the rustle of dry leaves. "Our suffering is bound to this orchard. Only by returning what was stolen can the spirit be appeased." As thunder rumbled in the distance, the spectral Thomas reappeared beside Evelyn. "Return the locket," he murmured, his voice a fragile echo of despair. Lillian wore it always, a symbol of love and sacrifice. It was taken from her on that cursed night. In its return lies the key to ending this endless horror. Unsure, but driven by a compulsion beyond her own understanding, Evelyn remembered the diary's description of a silver locket, a cherished memento of Lillian's that was lost among the ruins of the old family estate deep within the orchard's boundary. The kin's leader nodded slowly. You must find the locket, for with it you can piece together the final ritual. Only then can the curse be undone. With urgency mounting, Evelyn left the clearing, following a barely discernible path deeper into the orchard. The rain intensified and the canopy overhead opened to reveal a sky churning with dark clouds. As she made her way through tangled underbrush and over slick roots, echoes of sorrowful voices, barely audible, drifted to her ears. They implored her, warned her, and mourned in unison. Hours seemed to pass in a nightmarish blur until Evelyn came upon the dilapidated ruins of what once had been a grand farmhouse. Its walls were mottled with decay and the weight of forgotten memories, and ivy clawed at its surfaces like desperate fingers. Inside, in the shattered remnants of a parlor, she found an ornate silver locket half buried beneath broken porcelain. The locket, though tarnished, still held an undeniable beauty, a small portrait of a young woman whose eyes sparkled with hope. Evelyn's heart clenched as she realized this was Lillian's memento. Just as she clutched the locket in her trembling hand, the farmhouse door slammed shut with a violence that shook the very foundation of the ruined building. A low, guttural chuckle echoed within the shadows. So soon, you dare disturb what must remain silent? A voice rasped, a voice that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Shadows lengthened and coalesced into a shifting mass at the far end of the room. Evelyn backed away slowly. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded, though her voice cracked with fear. From the darkness emerged not a single figure, but a cascade of spectral images, tormented faces of those whose fates were intertwined with the orchard, their eyes filled with malice and despair. Amidst them, a figure radiated a dark authority, an ancient wraith whose very presence warped the air. "I am the Warden of Regret," it declared, its tone both commanding and sorrowful. "You have taken what was mine to guard. The locket is the key. But only by returning it to its rightful resting place can you sever the bonds that hold these souls captive." With little choice left, Evelyn accepted this dark directive. The warden's spectral eyes bored into hers as it explained, "Return to the stone well in the orchard's heart. Place the locket upon the altar inscribed there and recite the words that Lillian wrote on her final night. Only then can you undo the ancient pact forged in cruelty and greed." Fueled by a mix of dread and determination, Evelyn retraced her steps to the clearing. The orchard itself seemed to watch her, the rustling of leaves and twisting of branches punctuating her every move with ominous intent. When she reached the stone well again, she found the carved symbols aglow with an otherworldly light, as if anticipating the culmination of an ancient ritual. Clutching the silver locket, Evelyn knelt before the well. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Around her, the spectral kin gathered, their eyes wide with grief and hope mingled in equal measure. Above, the clouds churned in a cosmic ballet of impending judgment, as if the heavens themselves braced for the moment of reckoning. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn opened the diary to Lillian's final page. With a trembling voice that wavered between terror and resolve, she recited the desperate words etched into the fragile paper. "In blood and sorrow we made our plea. For innocence lost, restore what must be. Return the token of a pure heart's song. Let justice prevail where the damned belong." At the utterance of the final syllable, a tremor rippled across the clearing. The locket, held high in Evelyn's hand, began to tremble and emit a soft, eerie glow. With trembling fingers, she lowered it into a shallow cavity carved into the stone, a makeshift altar. The moment the locket made contact, the ground shuddered violently, and a pulse of spectral light burst outward. A cacophony of mournful wails and distant, wretched cries ascended in a dreadful crescendo. The kin's leader wept openly, her voice rising above the clamor. At last, the debt is returned. One by one, the tortured souls visible in the orchard's periphery began to flicker, their anguished forms softening before dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Amid the uproar of spectral release, the Warden of Regret loomed tall for a moment longer, its eyes ablaze with both fury and sorrow. "This is the end and the beginning of absolution," it intoned gravely. Then, as if an unseen force had lifted an ancient weight, silence fell over the Devil's Orchard. A silence that was not empty but filled with a profound, wistful peace. The oppressive gloom that had suffocated the clearing receded, replaced by a gentle luminescence that bathed every withered branch and fallen fruit in a soft, forgiving light. The legacy of betrayal, sacrifice, and ancestral guilt was finally being relinquished to the annals of history. Evelyn, drained and shivering, remained motionless as she absorbed the catharsis of the moment. The descendants of the cursed family bowed their heads in silent gratitude, and Thomas, the sorrowful keeper, offered her a weak smile of thanks before his figure faded into the ether. The orchard itself seemed to exhale, a deep, resonant sigh borne on the wind that rustled through the pines. In that transformative instance, Evelyn understood that the price of unearthing the darkest truths was both excruciating and redemptive. Though haunted by the memories of those tormented souls, she had borne witness to their final release. Her recorder, soaked with spectral confessions and whispered memories, would later recount the full measure of sorrow and sacrifice that had stained the Devil's Orchard for generations. As night yielded slowly to the faint light of an unremarkable dawn, Evelyn left the orchard, a changed soul burdened yet freed by the weight of unspeakable history. In her wake, the cursed land, now cleansed by truth and sacrifice, began its slow metamorphosis into a silent memorial, a place where grief was remembered so that future generations might learn to honor innocence rather than forsake it. Years afterward, Evelyn's chronicle of the Devil's Orchard circulated far and wide, a meticulous testimony to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of ancient malevolence. Its pages served not merely as a record of horror, but as a solemn reminder that confronting the darkness within can sometimes bring forth the light of redemption. And on quiet, moonless nights, if one were to wander through the boundary of that once damned clearing, the gentle whisper of freed souls might still be heard, promising that even in the depths of despair, hope can ultimately prevail.
Story number 7.
In the dead of night, when only the silent witnesses of twisted trees and barren fields remained, Lucas Greenwood drove the lonely back road toward the crumbling remains of the old moonlit drive-in. Abandoned for nearly 3 decades, the once thriving drive-in had become a macabre relic, a monument to a bygone era of flickering reels, family picnics, and long-forgotten laughter. Tonight, however, its ruined marquee and shattered screen promised a different kind of show. Lucas had grown up in the shadow of that faded glory. He remembered the drive-in's golden era when his father worked as a projectionist and the amber light of the projector painted dreams on a giant screen under the open sky. But that was before the night the film had ended, and before his father had disappeared without a trace. Now a young man burdened by unanswered questions and restless guilt, Lucas returned to this haunted place in search of truth. The moon hung low and sallow, its dim light struggling to penetrate the oppressive clouds that cloaked the sky. Lucas parked his aging sedan beneath a gnarled oak, its twisted limbs reaching toward the heavens like accusing fingers. He stepped out, the night air cold and heavy with the scent of rust and decay. In the distance, the abandoned drive-in beckoned like a decaying theater of lost memories, its neon letters flickering sporadically, as if struggling to announce one final performance. Lucas walked slowly toward the drive-in, his footsteps muffled by fallen leaves and the soft hum of the wind. Every sound was amplified, the creak of old metal, the rustle of unseen creatures, and his own heartbeat echoing in his chest. As he crossed the threshold of broken concrete and tangled weeds, he noticed a strange warmth emanating from within the ruined ticket booth. It was an anomaly in the otherwise lifeless place, a beacon that drew him in with equal parts dread and curiosity. Inside the booth, a dusty counter bore the faded words, "Moonlit Drive-In." Lucas's fingers traced the worn lettering as his mind flooded with recollections of childhood wonder and his father's gentle laughter. Then, almost imperceptibly, he heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from behind a pile of discarded film reels. With a trembling hand, he reached into the darkness and pulled out one of the old reels. The plastic casing felt shockingly cold, and embossed on its side was an inscription, "The Last Night." No sooner had the words registered than an eerie whisper cut through the silence. "Help me," it breathed, as if carried on the wind from a time long past. Lucas spun around, heart pounding, but saw only shadows dancing on the peeling walls. His rational mind screamed that it must be his imagination, yet deep inside, a neglected hope stirred. Perhaps this was his chance to finally understand the mystery of his father's disappearance. Guided by the real and the disembodied plea, Lucas made his way toward the main screen. Once a beacon for communal wonder and cinematic dreams, the vast, cavernous area now lay in ruins, a mosaic of shattered glass, splintered wood, and rusted remnants of a projector housing. Shadows writhed amid the wreckage, and with every step, Lucas felt as though unseen eyes tracked his progress. At the center of the screen stood a solitary, rusted projection booth. Its jagged edges and shattered windows gave it the air of a neglected mausoleum, and Lucas could almost believe that it guarded the secret to the drive-in's last, tragic show. Pushing open the creaking door, he entered. The interior was choked with decades of dust and decay. Only beams of moonlight managed to slip through gaps in the boarded-up windows. In the projector room, Lucas discovered a scattering of film canisters, their labels long since faded. One, in particular, caught his attention. It bore the same title as the reel he had found, The Last Night. With cautious reverence, he set up his portable projector he had stowed in the back of his car. His hands shook as he loaded the mysterious reel into the machine, the film cartridge clicking into place with a finality that sent shivers down his spine. Outside, the wind seemed to still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Lucas hit play, and the projector's beam sliced through the darkness, casting a ghostly image onto the torn canvas of the screen. The film flickered to life, a montage of images, seemingly haphazard at first, but slowly coalescing into something disturbingly coherent. It depicted moments in the drive-in's storied past. Families huddled beneath starlight, lovers whispering on rainy nights, and an unmistakable figure in the background, a projectionist with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Lucas's heart tightened. The man on the screen bore a striking resemblance to his father. But then the images shifted. The cheerful scenes darkened as the film began to reveal the drive-in's cursed fate. A sudden storm ravaged the grounds as screaming silhouettes ran from unseen terror. Faces twisted in agony, and the camera captured an inexplicable, malevolent presence looming at the edges of the frame. The gentle image of his father transformed, his eyes hollow and desperate, as if pleading for salvation. A low, distorted voice resonated from the projector's speakers, a voice that seemed to echo both inside the room and deep within Lucas's soul. I was deceived, bound by a promise of light, doomed to repeat the final act. The voice wavered, full of remorse and despair. Then, with a jolt of raw intensity, the film cut to a scene of a dark figure standing at the edge of the projection booth. In that instant, Lucas felt a searing pain in his chest, as though the very memory of his father's fate was clawing at him from within. The projection flickered erratically, the images disintegrating into static before plunging the room into oppressive darkness. For several agonizing minutes, Lucas stood frozen in place, his heartbeat thundering in his ears as he tried to reconcile what he just witnessed. Had his father been trying to warn him through this spectral film? And who, or what, was that dark figure? In the silence that followed, the door behind him creaked open and a presence made itself known, a tall, gaunt figure whose form seemed to shift like smoke in the weak moonlight filtering through the broken windows. Its eyes, dark and fathomless, locked onto Lucas with an intensity that chilled him to the marrow. "Lucas," the figure whispered, its voice a blend of longing and sorrow. "You must see. Remember all that was promised." Every instinct screamed for Lucas to flee, yet something in the figure's tone pulled him forward. He realized with dawning horror that the apparition's visage bore an uncanny likeness to his father, though twisted by age and despair beyond natural means. "Who are you?" Lucas managed to choke out, his voice barely a whisper. The apparition's eyes shimmered with an otherworldly light as it stepped closer. "I am the keeper of forgotten vows," it intoned slowly, "the one who paid the price for a promise that should never have been made. Your father sought to break free of a curse born of ambition and sorrow, but in the flicker of the final reel, he became ensnared. The darkness that claimed this drive-in now holds him captive, and if you wish to save him, you must confront the truth of that night." A cacophony of whispered voices swirled around Lucas, fragments of desperate pleas and echoes of an ancient ritual. As the spectral figure receded into the shadows, he found himself thrust into a whirlwind of memories, visions, and half-remembered nightmares. The drive-in transformed before his eyes into a theater of torment, a battleground where the living and the dead clashed, in perpetual conflict. Desperation mingled with determination in Lucas's eyes as he scoured the decrepit projection room. He discovered a leather-bound journal wedged behind a stack of film canisters. Its pages, yellowed with time, chronicled the twisted tale of the drive-in's final night. The journal was penned by a man known only as Alden, a projectionist who had once been a friend of his father's. Alden's ink-stained confessions told of a sinister deal struck with forces beyond mortal comprehension. In return for eternal fame and the promise of light everlasting, the drive-in's owners had offered a sacrifice that claimed the souls of the beloved keepers and forever cursed the Marquis with a desperate hunger for more. The journal's final entry read, "Tsar, in the culminating moments of the storm, when lightning carved the sky in jagged streaks, I saw the truth. The bond was sealed in blood and film, a curse that ensnares the projectionist in an endless loop of torment. If my words find a willing heart, heed this warning. To break the cycle, one must complete the final projection. Only by facing the darkness head-on, even if it consumes you entirely, can the promise be undone. Bring back the reel of redemption, and let the light restore what has been so cruelly taken." The enormity of Alden's confession sank into Lucas like lead. The final projection, the cursed reel that bound his father to this accursed place, had to be completed. With trembling resolve, Lucas began scouring the abandoned grounds for any trace of the missing film. Outside the projection room, he noticed a narrow corridor leading to an area once reserved for film storage. Brick by brick, he navigated through collapsed walls and broken glass until he discovered a hidden door tucked away behind a thick veil of ivy. Inside was a small, dust-choked archive. Dim light filtered in through a narrow window, illuminating rows of forgotten reels and faded posters. Lucas's heart pounded as he searched frantically among the decaying film canisters. Then his eyes landed upon a single reel, its label barely legible. Redemption. Its casing exuded a strange warmth, as though it were imbued with the last vestiges of hope. Cradling the reel in his hands, Lucas felt that faint pulse of familiarity, a connection to the memories of his father, of a life defined by gentle laughter and the quiet dignity of projection. With the reel secured, Lucas retraced his steps to the projection room. The spectral presence of his father hovered in the periphery of his vision as if urging him onward. As Lucas lowered himself onto the creaking seat beneath the ancient projector, the storm outside reached a fevered pitch. Rain hammered the roof and thunder roared overhead, a sound that echoed like the anguished cries of countless souls. Taking a deep breath, he loaded the redemption reel into the projector. The machine sputtered to life, its gears groaning in protest as the beam of light leapt forward to illuminate the vast, shattered canvas of the screen. This time, Lucas felt he was not merely watching a film, he was participating in its unfolding. The images that emerged were stark and raw. They depicted a ritual of release, intercut with flashes of the drive-in's tragic past, desperate negotiations with unseen forces, broken promises, and the final, doomed act of sacrifice. In the midst of the swirling images, Lucas saw his father once more, bright and whole, his eyes full of unspoken forgiveness. But then the scene darkened, and the malignant force that had ensnared the drive-in began to manifest in full. The silhouettes on the screen contorted into monstrous shapes, reaching out as if to drag Lucas into an abyss from which there was no escape. A surge of overwhelming terror gripped him. The air around Lucas crackled as spectral hands reached out from behind the screen, pressing into his mind with whispers of despair. "Join us, succumb to the endless night." They chanted in a chorus of distorted agony. The temperature plummeted and the room filled with an oppressive darkness that swallowed even the projector's beam. Yet amid the chaos, a spark of determination burned within Lucas. He recalled Alden's final words, that only by facing the darkness could the curse be undone. With a raw cry born of both anguish and resolve, Lucas began speaking aloud, reciting the very lines he had read in the journal. His voice, trembling yet clear, resonated through the room. "In the heart of despair, where shadows conspire, I call forth the light to break the cursed pyre. Let the film of redemption wash clean the night, restore the broken promise with truth as its might." As his incantation reverberated, the images on the screen wavered. The monstrous shapes recoiled, their cacophonous whispers fading into silence. The spectral hands that had nearly overwhelmed him disintegrated into motes of light that drifted toward the corners of the room. Outside, the storm's fury abated into a mournful drizzle, the tumult of nature gradually surrendering to an uneasy calm. In the flickering glow of the projector, Lucas saw the ritual reach its climax. The final scene unfolded, a vision of his father, stepping forward amid a flood of light, his smile gentle and forgiving. The malignant force that had haunted the drive-in shuddered, its dark tendrils recoiling as beams of pure white radiance swept over them. For an agonizing instant, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sound like the breaking of a long-held curse, the screen went dark. The projector's hum fell silent. Lucas, drenched in sweat and trembling from the ordeal, sat motionless in the pitch-black room. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a soft sigh, a sound that could only be the voice of a man finally freed of his tortured past. In the reflection of the shattered screen, he glimpsed a fleeting image. His father, standing at the threshold, his eyes filled with a bittersweet farewell. As the first pale light of dawn seeped through the broken windows, the oppressive darkness of the drive-in lifted. The air felt lighter, as though the weight of countless lost souls had been released into the morning mist. Lucas stepped outside, his heart filled with a mix of sorrow, relief, and the heavy knowledge of sacrifices made. The storm had passed, and in its wake, a quiet promise lingered. A promise that the truth, no matter how painful, would always guide the way to redemption. Lucas drove away from Moonlit Drive-In with a renewed purpose. The haunting echoes of that fateful night, the spectral images, and the whispered voices would remain with him forever. But now he carried within him the final precious truth, that even in the depths of horror, a flicker of light can shatter the curse of darkness and mend the broken bonds of the past.
Story number 8.
In the remote foothills of northern Maine, where the mist clung to barren hills like a shroud of secrets and the cold wind whispered lost memories, a solitary mansion stood at the crest of Sable Hill. Its weathered facade, draped in ivy and veined with cracks that ran like scars down ancient stone, was a relic of a bygone era. Locals in the nearby hamlet of Ellsbury scarcely mentioned its name, except in hushed tones and furtive glances, and always with a warning: never return after twilight. Mara Ellison, a determined archivist with a taste for unraveling forgotten histories, had inherited the mansion from an estranged relative whose sudden disappearance had been shrouded in mystery. The inheritance came with a heavy reputation and a cryptic note scrawled in shaky handwriting: "The sins of our blood are chained to these walls. Unbind them at your peril." With equal measures of skepticism and resolve, Mara set out to inspect the dilapidated mansion on a late October evening, when the sliver of a new moon barely illuminated the sky. Mara's car rumbled along the winding country road until it coughed to a stop before the looming structure. As she stepped out, the chill of the autumn air bit through her coat. Shadows stretched in every direction as if the darkness itself yearned to keep its secrets hidden. The wrought iron gate, caked in rust and adorned with twisted leafless vines, creaked open at her gentle push, a sound that seemed to echo like a mournful sigh across the silent landscape. Inside, the mansion's grand foyer was choked with dust and memories. Faded portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following Mara's every movement with imperceptible judgment. A grand staircase spiraled upward into shadow, and beneath a shattered chandelier, remnants of once sumptuous tapestries lay tattered on the floor. Every step she took stirred echoes from decades past, as though the mansion itself whispered a dirge of regret. Drawn inexplicably toward a narrow corridor on the second floor, Mara's flashlight beam landed on a heavy oak door slightly ajar. The door was engraved with an intricate pattern, almost like a lattice that bound something beneath. With a hesitant push, she entered what appeared to be a study, its walls lined with dusty leather-bound journals and brittle papers. On the large desk lay an old diary belonging to her ancestor, Caroline Hawthorne, whose words told a tale of grief, guilt, and cursed promises. As Mara flipped through the brittle pages, the diary chronicled a bitter feud that had torn the family apart more than a century ago. Caroline's entries detailed a ritual, a desperate incantation meant to bind a malevolent force that had been inadvertently summoned during a desperate bid to save the family from ruin. In a final, hastily scrawled message, Caroline admitted her own part in the tragedy. In the depth of my sorrow, I called upon that which should never be named. Now its echo forever haunts these halls, and our sins bind our blood to this cursed ground. Before Mara could fully absorb the damning confession, the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and the feeble beam of her flashlight wavered. A distinct sound, soft and rhythmic, like the beating of a distant drum, began to reverberate from behind the closed door at the far end of the study. With her heart hammering in her chest, she approached it with cautious footsteps. As the door swung open, a heavy darkness poured out, and there in the center of the room lay an antique mirror, whose surface was obscured by a fine, almost imperceptible film of dust and sorrow. The mirror's frame was ornate, featuring carvings of entwined serpents and weeping angels, as though mourning an inevitable tragedy. For a moment, Mara simply stared into the opaque glass, her eyes searching for the truth beyond the tarnished reflection. Then, as if stirred by her presence, the mirror began to ripple like disturbed water. A pale figure materialized slowly within its depths, a woman draped in tattered garments, her face an expression of endless despair, eyes wide with pleading horror. "Help me," the apparition whispered, the sound echoing around the silent study. The voice was neither wholly sorrowful nor malicious. It was simply the sound of a soul trapped between worlds, crying out for release. Mara's logical mind raced, yet her curiosity overpowered her terror. "Who are you?" she called softly, extending a trembling hand toward the spectral figure. The apparition's eyes locked onto her, and in a disembodied tone laden with centuries of regret, the ghost replied, "I am Annabelle. I was cursed by the sin of our kind, and now I dwell in this prison of mirrors. Only when our burden is unbound can I be free." The very air around Mara seemed to thicken with unspoken sorrow as she absorbed Annabelle's words. Over the next few days, Mara became engrossed in a painstaking investigation of the mansion's dark past. Every creak, every rustle of unseen movement in the night deepened the mansion's oppressive atmosphere. She spent endless hours poring over the diaries, legal documents, and faded letters hidden in secret compartments. The deeper she delved into her family's troubled legacy, the more the house appeared to react. Doors slammed shut on their own, murmurs echoed in empty halls, and ghostly figures flitted just beyond the edge of her vision. One stormy evening, as torrential rain battered the mansion's decaying walls and lightning tore across the sky, Mara was drawn once more to the study. The diary lay open, its final pages nearly consumed by water stains. A new entry, penned in fresh, frantic handwriting that did not belong to Caroline, was scrawled in an elegant yet trembling hand. "The chain of sorrow grows endless. In our darkest hour, our voices join as one. The ritual must be repeated at the stroke of midnight, deep in the heart of the labyrinth beneath the house. Only then may the wrath of our guilt be appeased and our tormented souls set free." A chill that was colder than the storm itself crept along Mara's spine. The entry mentioned an underground passage, one that she had never seen before amid the familiar corridors of the mansion. With no time to lose, Mara gathered her courage and ventured into the basement. The stairs creaked underfoot as they descended into darkness. Her flashlight revealed cobwebs hanging like ancient shrouds from the low, arched ceiling, and the smell of damp earth and decay permeated the air. Tucked away behind a collapsed bookshelf, Mara discovered a narrow, hidden door, its edges marked with the same serpentine motifs as the mirror upstairs. With trembling fingers, she forced it open, revealing a narrow, winding corridor that plunged into the bowels of the earth. The tunnel walls were etched with cryptic symbols and faded bloodstains. As she ventured deeper, the oppressive weight of history and guilt pressed upon her, and the sound of her heartbeat became the only measure of time. At the end of the corridor, Mara entered a vast subterranean chamber, lit by flickering, guttering lanterns that cast long, wavering shadows. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface engraved with an intricate pattern of names and symbols, names that Mara soon recognized as those of her ancestors, along with other generations whose lives had been intertwined with the mansion's dark secret. Resting atop the altar was a black iron key, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly as if alive with ancient power. From the darkness, a slow, sorrowful chant began to reverberate, as if emanating from every wall. A tone, it intoned, growing louder until the entire chamber seemed suffused with the tragic resonance of 100 voices. Mara's hands shook as she picked up the key, feeling a surge of energy pulse through her. The key, it seemed, was not merely a tool. It was a catalyst that bound the sins of the past to the present. In that moment, the spectral form of Annabelle emerged once more at the edge of the chamber. Her translucent figure glided forward, tears streaming silently down her ethereal cheeks. "You hold the key, Mara," she murmured, her voice echoing with the gravity of 1,000 lost souls. "The ritual must be completed. To break our curse, you must place the key into the altar's lock at midnight and recite the words of release as they were written by our suffering. Only then can the cycle be broken." The weight of her family's sins and the responsibility of unbinding this terrible curse pressed down on Mara. The cryptic instructions had been scattered throughout the mansion's records, fragments of a ritual that had never been fully understood. Until now. With the key clutched firmly in her hand, Mara retreated to the study, where the diary offered one final, desperate clue. When the moon is swallowed by the clouds and the clock strikes the midnight hour, the voices of our forebears shall cry out for freedom. Speak the incantation of redemption, and let the chain of guilt shatter beneath the force of truth. The storm outside raged as midnight approached. In the study, Mara moved a heavy portrait that concealed a narrow passage leading to the central chamber beneath the mansion. Heart pounding, she retraced her steps through the labyrinthine corridors until she reached the underground chamber. The spectral chorus of the ancestors grew louder, almost as if they sensed their chance for release. With the key trembling in her grasp, Mara approached the stone altar. The clock on the mansion's decaying wall, set long ago and seemingly frozen in time, suddenly chimed through the heavy air, a melancholy toll that marked the witching hour. The room shuddered as if in anticipation. Taking a deep breath, Mara inserted the black iron key into the lock carved into the altar's surface. The key turned slowly, its runes flaring with a cold blue light. As she began to recite the incantation, her voice, at first tentative, grew resolute, echoing off the ancient stone. "In blood and sorrow, our sins entwined, let truth be spoken to unbind, the chain of grief in our hearts confined, release the lost, leave no soul behind." The reaction was immediate and violent. The ground trembled as if the very earth was crying out in anguish. From the shadows, spectral figures surged forth, faces twisted in sorrow and rage, bodies ethereal, yet weighted with the anguish of centuries. They moved in a swirling vortex around the altar, their voices melding into a single harmonized lament. The lights on the key blazed brighter, and the runes on the altar pulsed in tandem with Mara's incantation. For what felt like an eternity, time itself wavered. The specter's agonized wails, the resonance of sorrow, and the unyielding force of ancient guilt swirled around Mara until she could scarcely differentiate between the living and the dead. Yet, with every word of the incantation, a palpable release began to radiate from the altar. The tumultuous swirling of spirits slowed, and one by one the spectral forms softened, their edges blurring until they became nothing more than whispers on the stale air. Then, as the final syllable left her lips, an almost unbearable stillness descended upon the chamber. The storm beyond seemed to subside into a gentle patter, and the ghosts that had tormented the mansion for over a century faded like mist in the morning light. In the silence that followed, Mara felt the heavy weight of a curse finally lifted. A deep, sorrowful exhalation that resonated from the stone walls and her very soul. In that quiet aftermath, Annabelle's spectral form materialized one last time before Mara, her expression transformed from despair to a fragile serenity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing with a mournful gratitude that transcended time. "Our chains are broken. Our souls may now find peace." With those words, Annabelle slowly dissolved into the ambient light, leaving only the lingering echo of her farewell. Mara, tears mixing with relief and sorrow, remained in the chamber long after the spirits had departed. The key, now dim and lifeless in her palm, was a tangible reminder of the family legacy, a dark stain upon generations that had finally been washed away by truth and sacrifice. She knew that the mansion, once a monument of guilt and despair, would carry forward the memory of what had transpired that night. Yet for the first time in over a century, its halls might allow for healing, for a future unburdened by the sins of the past. Emerging from the underground passage as dawn began to break, Mara felt the subtle warmth of the rising sun pierce the lingering gloom. The mansion, though still marked by decay, seemed somehow lighter, its oppressive silence now infused with the quiet promise of renewal. Mara understood that the story of Sable Hill was far from over. The curse was broken, but the scars of history would remain, a somber lesson etched in time. With her recorder of secrets and a new resolve burning within her, she vowed to document every truth, every whisper of sorrow, so that future generations might learn from the past rather than be condemned by it. As she drove away from the mansion, the rising sun cast long, forgiving shadows across the hills. Though the ghosts of her family and the anguished souls of the past had been released that midnight, their memories would linger in the gentle rustling of the leaves, in the creaking of old wood, and in the quiet spaces where sorrow met redemption. And in those silent moments before sleep, when the wind carried the faint echo of a long-forgotten lullaby, Mara would sometimes pause, remembering the voices that had once cried out in despair, and the courage it took to let them go.
Story number 9.
The night was oppressively silent as a full, swollen moon rose above the barren fields of rural Illinois, its light casting elongated shadows over miles of corn that whispered with secrets older than memory. In the midst of these cursed fields stood an abandoned farmhouse known to the locals only as Hallow's End, a place that had become the epicenter of strange happenings since the harvest season began. No one in the nearby town of Ridgewater dared to speak its name by day, and at night, the wind seemed to carry murmurs of its tragic past. Marisol Vega, an investigative reporter with a fierce determination to reveal hidden truths, had long been intrigued by the tales of Hallow's End. Pressed for her next big story and haunted by her own unsolved family mysteries, she set her sights on the eerie farmhouse that had been shrouded in rumors of unspeakable occurrences and restless souls wandering amid the tall cornstalks. Clad in a battered leather jacket and armed with nothing more than a camcorder, a notebook, and a fierce sense of duty, Marisol ventured into the fields on a humid October night when the air was heavy with anticipation and dread. A narrow gravel road led her to the derelict farmhouse. The building's weathered siding was streaked with dark stains, and its windows stared out emptily like the eyes of a long-forgotten phantom. As Marisol stepped out of her car, the crunch of gravel underfoot sounded like an ominous drumbeat. The wind carried the scent of decay and wild, overgrown vegetation. A flickering neon sign, barely clinging to life on a rusted post, read Hallow's End Inn in letters that dripped like blood on peeling paint. It was an invitation and a warning. Marisol's heart pounded as she approached the creaking front door, its surface marred by time and neglect. With each hesitant knock, her own echo answered back from the silent void of the deserted foyer. Inside, the air was laced with stale smoke and despair. Faded wallpaper, fractured by decades of neglect, adorned the walls. Dust motes swirled in the weak light of a single, dangling bulb that seemed to cast more shadows than light. As Marisol stepped further into the heart of the house, the silence was broken by a creak, a subtle, almost imperceptible shuffle that hinted at unseen movement. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling in the stillness. There was no reply, only the faint rustling of fabric somewhere in the darker recesses of the building. With her camcorder held tightly, Marisol advanced, determined to gather evidence for her story. In the narrow corridor leading to what once had been a parlor, she discovered a series of old photographs scattered on the floor. They depicted smiling faces in formal attire, families united in a moment of joy, a stark contrast to the desolation that now enveloped the mansion. One photograph caught her attention, a young woman with sorrowful eyes clutching a cornstalk as if it were a talisman. Behind that image, handwritten on the back in spidery script, was a single name: Eliza. Marisol's curiosity deepened. As she continued to explore the dim rooms, the sound of her footsteps seemed to awaken echoes of the past. In a dilapidated study, she found a journal wedged between stacks of brittle ledgers. Its pages chronicled a family history steeped in tragedy. The journal belonged to a man named Silas Hallow, whose desperate entries detailed the misfortunes that had plagued his lineage. According to the entries, the family had once prospered from the harvest until a terrible bargain was struck. In the dead of one fateful night, Silas had offered a sacrifice to an ancient, nameless force that dwelled among the cornfields, a force that promised unending prosperity in return for a single soul. As the ink bled into the paper, the final entry read, "When the harvest moon is full and the corn sings with voices of the dead, remember that every blessing has its price. Our souls are no longer our own." The words sent a chill down Marisol's spine. Had the prosperity of the Hollow family come at the cost of their very souls? And did that curse still linger in the fields surrounding the house? Compelled by the journal's dark revelations, Marisol set out into the fields. The corn stood in neat rows that stretched far into the distance, their golden tassels trembling in the autumn breeze. With every step, the land seemed to sigh, a low, mournful sound that resonated with ancient grief. Clutching her camcorder as if it were a lifeline, Marisol advanced toward a clearing where the corn grew wild and unkempt. There, in the center of the open field, an old wooden plow lay half buried in the earth, its rusted blade glinting in the moonlight. And nearby, she noticed what appeared to be a small stone altar, crudely built yet stained with dark, dried marks. A voice, soft yet piercing, emanated from the altar, echoing in the silence of the cornfield. "Come, remember," it beckoned in a tone that bore the weight of infinite sorrow. Marisol paused, her heart hammering in her chest. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. The sound of the wind seemed to answer her with hushed, frantic whispers. Yet, amid the cacophony of voices, one plea stood out, a female whisper pleading, "Eliza, come home!" Determined now to piece together the mystery, Marisol rummaged through the journal further. The pages described Eliza as the beloved daughter of Silas Hallow, a gentle soul doomed to be sacrificed in the ritual that promised fortune in exchange for a life. The ritual, it seemed, had been repeated each harvest since that fateful night. A cyclic torment that demanded a soul to feed the ancient hunger of the corn. As her eyes pored over the elegant yet desperate handwriting, Marisol realized that the curse was not an isolated misfortune, but a malignant force that had haunted the fields for generations. The air grew colder as she lifted her camcorder, its screen flickering as if disturbed by an unseen presence. In a clearing near the altar, the corn rustled in an unnatural rhythm, almost like a chant. Shadows began to stretch and twist among the stalks, taking on the semblance of human figures. One such figure, indistinct but unmistakably feminine, drifted into view. She wore a faded dress that billowed softly in the breeze, and her eyes shone with tears of regret. "Eliza?" Marisol whispered, stepping closer. The apparition paused, its face a mask of sorrow and longing. "I was taken by the promise," the figure intoned softly, her voice a broken melody carried on the wind. "I was sacrificed so that our land might thrive, but the cost is the curse of a harvest steeped in blood." The ghost's gaze drifted to the stone altar, and with an agonizing effort, she reached out a translucent hand. "Bring me the locket of remembrance," she pleaded. "Only then can my spirit be freed." Marisol's mind raced. A locket had been mentioned in a footnote in the journal, a family heirloom that once belonged to Eliza. It was said to be concealed somewhere within the house, a symbol of innocence and unfulfilled love. With a deep breath, she vowed to locate the cherished memento, convinced that it might be the key to breaking the cycle of sacrifice and torment. Inside the mansion, Marisol scoured every forgotten corner. In a narrow attic accessed by a creaking staircase, she discovered a dusty trunk hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt. With trembling fingers, she unlatched the trunk and discovered various relics of a bygone era: faded letters, a broken music box, and, nestled in a velvet-lined compartment, an ornate silver locket. Its delicate filigree was tarnished with time, yet the engraving of a small rose was unmistakable, a symbol that had been passed down in the Hallow family for generations. Clutching the locket, Marisol returned to the cornfield, where the spectral figure of Eliza waited at the altar. The ghost's eyes fixed on the locket as if it were the only beacon in a sea of darkness. "You have it," Eliza whispered, her tones suffused with both relief and sorrow. "Place it upon the altar and recite the words of release. Only then can the harvest of midnight be cleansed." Marisol's heart pounded as she crossed the threshold of the field and approached the crude altar. The air was charged with unspoken power, and the corn around her trembled as if in anticipation. Under the cold gaze of the harvest moon, she knelt before the stone structure. With trembling hands, she opened the locket. Inside, a faded photograph of a smiling little girl, the young Eliza, stared back at her. In that silent moment, the significance of the curse crystallized in Marisol's mind. Generations of blood and sacrifice, sealed by a promise of prosperity that had demanded the purest souls. With her voice barely louder than a whisper, Marisol recited a passage partially transcribed from the journal, a ritual of release that Silas Hallow had once attempted to bind the malevolent force. In the silent hour of the harvest moon, let the blood of the sacrifice be acknowledged. Release the pain, unbind the sorrow, and let the spirit of innocence rise anew. Each word resonated across the empty field as if awakened by an ancient power. As the final syllable faded into the night, the ground trembled beneath Marisol's knees. The locket began to glow with a soft, ethereal light that bathed the altar in a gentle radiance. Then a spectral wind swept through the corn, carrying with it a chorus of voices, sobs, laments, and fragile expressions of hope. For a moment, the cornfield became a living tapestry of spectral energy. Ghostly figures danced amid the stalks, their faces etched with the eternal anguish of sacrifice. And somewhere in the midst of them, the anguished cries of lost souls mingled with the gentle rustle of the golden leaves. Eliza's apparition moved forward, her once muted countenance now illuminated by the locket's light. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice trembling with gratitude as tears shimmered like dew upon her translucent cheeks. Slowly, other spectral figures emerged, a mother with eyes full of regret, a young man whose grin held the pain of unspoken hell, a dozen souls bound together by a legacy of grief. They circled the altar before one by one dissolving into tendrils of mist that drifted upwards and away, finally released from their ancient bondage. But the night did not bring complete solace. As the spirits ascended, the earth moaned as though it carried the burden of their sorrow, and a final, lingering voice, deep and resonant, echoed from somewhere in the distance. "Remember the cost, remember the harvest." The warning, a chilling reminder that some debts cannot be entirely expunged, sent a shiver through Marisol's soul. Gazing up at the moon, now softened by swirling clouds, Marisol felt a mingling of relief and foreboding. The curse that had plagued the Hallow family, and by extension the cursed lands of Ridgewater, had been lessened for this cycle. Yet the ancient force that demanded sacrifice was not fully vanquished. It would wait in the dark corners of history for another harvest, another unwary soul to cross its path. For days afterward, Marisol remained in Ridgewater, meticulously documenting every detail of her encounter. She interviewed wary locals, collecting fragmented recollections and half-remembered legends of a time when the cornfields sang with both bounty and bloodshed. The community, though scarred by its past, began to whisper of a change, as if the release had ushered in a tentative renewal. Yet in the quiet hours before dawn, many still claimed to hear the low, mournful hum of voices carried on the wind, an eternal reminder that the earth never forgets its price. Marisol's article, published under the headline "The Harvest of Midnight," ignited debate far and wide. Scholars and skeptics clashed in heated discourse over the nature of curses and the price of prosperity. Yet those who had felt the suffocating weight of Ridgewater's haunted past knew that some things were beyond explanation. A dark inheritance passed down through blood and corn, a legacy that defied logic and demanded remembrance. Late one evening, as Marisol packed up her notes in the now quiet farmhouse, a soft knock echoed at the door. Startled, she opened it to find an elderly man with lined features and sorrowful eyes. "I've come to thank you," he said quietly, his voice a trembling whisper of relief. "Our family, our souls have been lighter these days. You brought us hope where we had lost all faith." His gratitude and warning mingled in his words as he continued, "But remember, when the harvest moon rises again, the debt may call once more." Marisol nodded, feeling the gravity of his message settle deep into her bones. As she drove away down the same lonely road, the farmhouse and its surrounding fields receded into the shadowed distance, yet their whispers remained, a constant murmur in the wind, a secret kept by the earth. In the stillness of that haunted night, under a sky heavy with silent stars, she understood that history is not easily forgotten, and some bonds, no matter how dark, can be broken only at the cost of remembering every painful sacrifice.
Story number 10.
In the depths of a forest where sunlight seldom pierced the tangled canopy, and the air reeked of damp decay, The derelict Grimswell Mill loomed like a malignant specter. Its weathered, crumbling stone walls and sagging timbers bore the scars of centuries-old misfortune, and locals whispered of sinister events that had long since drained the mill of life and color. It stood isolated on the outskirts of the quiet village of Blackridge, a settlement that had grown up around dark legends and cautionary tales shared in hushed tones around flickering fires. Allison Drexel, a determined historian with a passion for uncovering the truth behind local lore, had made it her mission to document the mill's grim past. Drawn by stories of inexplicable disappearances and ghostly sightings, she had spent years poring over newspaper clippings, forgotten diaries, and oral traditions passed down by longtime residents of Blackridge. The mill, notorious for its macabre history, was reputed to have been built by a wealthy family whose greed was matched only by their cruelty. They had exploited their workers until a sudden, catastrophic fire had claimed many lives. In the decades since, the village had borne the heavy burden of that sorrow, and the mill's ruins had become the epicenter of an enduring curse. On a chilly October evening, under a bruised sky streaked with the fading light of dusk, Allison arrived at the outskirts of the forest. The path was little more than a narrow track through gnarled woods. Every crunch of dead leaves underfoot reverberated as a reminder of the passage of time and loss. Even before she set eyes on the mill, the atmosphere felt oppressively alive, as if the trees themselves watched her with grim intent. Emerging from the dense woodland, Allison's heart skipped a beat at the sight of Grimswell Mill. Its silhouette was etched against the low-hanging clouds, the heavy planks of its once grand water wheel still clinging to life despite years of abandonment. With her notebook, digital recorder, and a camera slung around her shoulder, she pushed forward, determined to record every detail of this haunted relic. Stepping through a broken, creaking door, Allison entered a vast hall of shadows and decay. The interior was a labyrinth of empty machinery, scattered debris, and peeling paint. Dust motes danced in the diffuse light that seeped through cracks in the walls. Every step echoed in the hollowness, as though the building itself mourned a long-forgotten tragedy. A musky blend of smoke, rust, and damp earth assaulted her senses, adding an almost tangible weight to the oppressive silence. Her voice, soft yet resolute, broke the stillness. "Is anyone here?" It was a question not solely aimed at human ears, if any remained, but at the restless spirits that might linger. For an agonizing moment, there was nothing but the creaking of the wood and the distant chirp of a lone cricket. Then, as if answering her plea, a faint rustling sound emerged from deeper within the mill. Allison's pulse quickened. She advanced cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a resolute blade. In what had once been the main production room, she discovered charred timbers arranged in a disordered pattern. Scorched remains of machinery jutted from the floor like the remnants of a grim monument. Amidst the wreckage, a scrap of paper, yellowed with age, lay partially buried. Unfolding it gingerly, Allison found a crudely written note. "They took our voices, our lives, and left us with ash. The fire was no accident. Beware the curse that lingers." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Who were they? And what curse bound the mill and the souls that had perished within its burning walls? As Allison continued her exploration, the temperature dropped noticeably. Her breath became visible, swirling in the weak light of her torch. In a narrow corridor leading to a forgotten storeroom, she heard it, a soft, plaintive whisper that appeared to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The words were too indistinct to understand, laden with sorrow and warning. Swallowing her trepidation, Allison pressed forward, her recorder capturing each hushed sound. Inside the storeroom, stacked high against moldy walls, were rusted tools and faded personal belongings. A broken locket, a button with a family crest, and a scrap of fabric that still bore the semblance of a once proud uniform. Each item seemed an echo of lives abruptly extinguished. Amid these relics, a portrait lay face down on a dusty shelf, a faded painting of a stern-faced man whose eyes, even in paint, hinted at a deep and terrible regret. Slowly, as if compelled by some intangible force, Allison flipped the portrait upright. The inscription on its reverse read, "Elias Grimswell, 1827 to 1856. Our salvation lies not in gold, but in truth." The name resonated with the murmurings of old tales. Elias Grimswell had been the mill's owner, a man whose twisted ambition and cruelty had driven the workers to despair. Legend had it that when a disastrous fire claimed the lives of many, Elias had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the charred ruins of his empire and a lingering curse upon his bloodline. Suddenly, a harsh gust of wind rattled the broken windows, sending shards of glass tinkling across the floor. The whispering returned, stronger now, accompanied by a fleeting glimpse of a shadow sliding along the far wall. "Justice! Avenge our souls!" The voices cried out in chorus, a spectral lament filled with anguish. Allison's mind raced. Was it merely the wind stirring memories of sorrow, or was something else present? Determined, she backed toward the entrance when a low, sorrowful moan froze her in place. At the far end of the corridor, where the darkness converged with the dim glow of her flashlight, stood a figure. A woman draped in tattered garments, her visage partially obscured by wild, disheveled hair. Her eyes, wide and misty, locked onto Allison's with an intensity that pierced the veil of time. "Help me," the apparition whispered, her voice brittle and laden with sorrow. "Let us be heard. Let our agony be laid to rest." Allison's scientific mind warred with the terror that gripped her, yet compassion for the tortured soul steeled her. "Who are you?" she asked softly, kneeling in a reverent manner. In a voice that trembled like a dying ember, the spirit replied, "I am Miriam, a worker once bound to these mills. We were silenced, our lives devoured by greed and burned away in that wretched fire. Elias, he promised salvation but delivered only damnation." Her eyes filled with tears that shimmered like dew even in spectral form. "If you can bear witness, then tell our story, so that our restless souls may finally find peace." Haunted by Miriam's plight, Allison vowed then and there to uncover the full measure of the mill's dark history. Over the next few days, she pored over the archival documents stored in Blackridge's modest library, connecting accounts of monstrous cruelty and hidden bargains. Old oral histories spoke of secret rituals conducted in the dead of night by desperate workers, rituals meant to ward off the curse, but which only served to strengthen its hold. One elderly man, his voice quavering as he recounted his childhood memories, murmured, "They say the mill's blood runs deeper than the burnt earth, that Elias made a pact, sacrificing souls for wealth, and the mill, it cries out every midnight." Armed with this new knowledge, Allison returned to Grimswell Mill under a starless sky. Midnight had come, and the oppressive darkness was punctuated only by the weak flicker of her flashlight. She found herself in the very corridor where Miriam had appeared, and once again, the faint lamentations rose from the walls. In a room at the very heart of the mill, a room that once served as Elias Grimswell's private office, she discovered a hidden compartment behind a collapsed bookshelf. Within it lay an old ledger, its pages yellowed and stained with soot and what might have been dried blood. The ledger chronicled financial records and cryptic entries that hinted at secret transactions and arcane rituals. One entry, dated on the eve of the mill's great fire, read, "For every soul claimed, a debt is sown. May the balance be redressed by truth, and let the innocent no longer pay the price of our ambition." A chill slithered down Allison's spine as she realized that this was the key to the curse. Elias had orchestrated a bargain with forces beyond mortal ken, a dark ritual meant to secure his fortune at the expense of human lives. The ledger was evidence, concrete and damning, of the injustice that had forever tainted the walls of Grimswell Mill. As she absorbed the revelations, a cacophony of mournful voices erupted from the darkness. Shadows moved with frantic urgency, and Allison felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon her. "Our voices," they cried out, a chorus so filled with sorrow and despair that Allison's heart nearly burst with the injustice of it all. Determined to break the cycle of silence and retribution, Allison resolved to record every detail of what she had found. She set up her digital recorder at the center of the mill's great hall, where the scars of fire and sorrow were most vividly apparent. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I stand before the remnants of Grimswell Mill, a place where greed lit a fire that consumed innocence and cursed the land. I have uncovered proof of the heinous pact forged by Elias Grimswell. His betrayal and the countless lives lost cry out for acknowledgement. In their memory, I swear to recount your agony so that your voices may no longer be stifled." At that moment, the temperature plummeted. The vaulting darkness of the great hall seemed to pulse with an ancient rage. In response, spectral figures began to materialize, workers, men and women whose expressions were etched with eternal torment. Miriam reappeared, her pale form more distinct against the flickering gloom. "Bear witness," she implored softly. "Tell our truth. Set us free." A sudden force of wind roared through the room, scattering old papers and igniting a swirling dance of ash and memory. The ledger, clutched in Allison's hands, burst open to another page, a hastily scrawled incantation that spoke of redemption through confession and acknowledgement. "By the truths once hidden, by the souls that burned so bright, may the veil of darkness be lifted, may the wrong be made a right." The recorder captured every haunting sound, every desperate cry. For a timeless moment, Allison found herself ensnared by the raw intensity of the mill's collective grief. Her eyes stung with tears as she spoke the incantation aloud, her voice merging with the spectral chorus. The power of her declaration seemed to hang in the air, challenging the malignant forces that had long held sway over the cursed place. In response, the very walls trembled. The oppressive force that had choked the mill for generations wavered, as if in the grip of a fevered retreat. The spectral figures, their faces softening from anguish to a semblance of relief, began to fade into gentle radiance. Miriam, with one final look of sorrowful gratitude, whispered, "Thank you. Our voices shall now be heard." Her form dissipated into motes of silver light that ascended slowly toward the indifferent heavens. As dawn crept over the horizon, the oppressive darkness of Grimswell Mill seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile hope that had been nurtured by the power of truth. Allison, exhausted but resolute, gathered the ledger and her recorder, knowing that she had not only unearthed a scandalous chapter of history, but had also participated in a rite of redemption, a moment that would forever alter the fate of the cursed mill and the voices of the lost. In the weeks and months that followed, Allison's meticulous account of the mill's tragic past spread throughout Blackridge and beyond. Her articles stirred heated debate, demanded justice for those long consigned to oblivion, and prompted solemn memorial services for the workers whose lives had been sacrificed on the altar of greed. Yet, whenever she closed her eyes at night, Allison would still hear the distant echo of whispered pleas and the soft, fading murmurs of Miriam and her comrades, a reminder that while the curse had been lifted, the scars of injustice could never be fully erased. For in the end, Grimswell Mill remained a monument to human cruelty and a testament to the resilience of truth. Its crumbling walls, bathed in the gentle light of a new day, bore silent witness to the fact that even in the deepest darkness, the voices of the innocent can rise to banish the specter of evil. And as Allison continued her work to ensure that history would remember the lost, the fields surrounding Blackridge whispered softly, like a promise that some debts, when acknowledged with courage and love, can finally be laid to rest.